Okay, thank you, everybody, and welcome to our Provo Municipal Council Transportation Retreat. It is Tuesday, October 27th, 2020 at 4:01 p.m. This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means. On October 13th, 2020, in accordance with Utah Code 52-4-2074, Council Chair George Handley determined that conducting meetings of the Municipal Council with an anchor location, such as the Municipal Council Chamber, presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. And these are the facts upon which I made this determination. Since March 6, 2020, Utah has been in a declared state of emergency due to novel coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19. A disease outbreak which the World Health Organization has characterized as a pandemic. On October 13th, 2020, Governor Herbert stated that declaration would be replaced with a public health emergency order. Utah's coronavirus task force rates Utah County as an area with a high level of coronavirus transmission. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention state that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. Federal, state, and local authorities have recommended, even required, that individuals limit the size of public gatherings, wear face masks, and follow social distancing guidelines. And Provo City has adopted a COVID-19 response ordinance that requires facial coverings, social distancing, and limits on public gatherings. I should note that that ordinance has since been repealed, but we are still subject to the state guidelines. And physical distancing measures will be difficult to set up and maintain in the Provo City Municipal Council chamber and other meeting rooms. Additionally, the chair of the governing board of the redevelopment agency of Provo City has determined that its meetings are subject to the same risks and has adopted the same procedures as the municipal council. This meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing at youtube.com/Provo City Council. This meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City Council YouTube channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. And I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking so as to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. I'll state the names of those who are present for the sake of a roll call. And when I'm done, we'll have an opening prayer provided by Ms. Ellsworth, if she has joined us. Oh, she is. Do I see her? Where is she? I see a raised, oh, there she is. Okay, yeah, Ms. Ellsworth is here. Okay, so I'm joined, I'm George Handley, Council Chair. I'm joined by Vice Chair David Harding and other council members, Dave Shipley, Dave Sewell, Bill Fillmore, Travis Hoban, and Shannon Ellsworth, and Cliff Strachan, our Executive Director of the Council. Let's see, we're joined by Mayor Michelle Kafusi, and I'm trying to see who else is here, who's normally on the dais in our public meetings. I think Isaac Paxman is our Deputy Mayor, and we're joined by other staff members who I will be presenting and other guests who will be presenting. And I assume Brian Jones will be joining us at some point, or is he not joining this meeting?
Brian often doesn't join us for retreats unless there's a legal aspect he needs to worry about. Also, I would mention that Wayne is excused. He's on vacation this week. Wayne Parker, our Chief Administrative Officer, but we are joined by Dixon Holmes, our Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. All right. Ms. Ellsworth, would you please go ahead with the opening prayer? Thank you. You're on mute. I don't know if you're trying to speak. I wonder if she's having some difficulties. I haven't seen her video yet.
Mr. Chair, I'm willing to step in if so desired.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Harding. Thank you. Looks like she is having some audio issues.
Our Father in heaven, we come before thee at the beginning of this transportation retreat with a request that we may be instructed and may understand these transportation concepts more clearly, so that we may make better future decisions in the future for the people of Provo. We ask for a blessing upon those who are presenting, that they may do so clearly and may convey their knowledge and the important things for us to understand. We ask for a blessing generally upon the people of Provo, as well as those throughout the state, our great nation, and around the world. At this time of the pandemic, we ask for a blessing upon those who are ill and those that are caring for those that are ill. We ask thee for a blessing upon our leaders, that they may give us good guidance, blessing upon those who are researching and fighting the pandemic. And we ask a blessing upon the people of Provo, that we may be wise in our actions, that we may curtail this disease and may be able to move on beyond this disease. We ask for a blessing upon all the civil servants in the city, and particularly those on first responders on the front lines, that they may be protected as they serve us. And we ask for thy providence upon the whole city. This we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. All right. Let me remind everybody, as a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. And please use the raise hand function to indicate that you would like to speak, and wait to speak until called on by the council chair. We'll begin with our first item on the agenda, which is a presentation from Design Workshop to discuss transportation policy and the general plan. We're grateful to have Becky Zimmerman from Design Workshop as president of Design Workshop, and Brooke Cowles, associate, for this presentation and portion of our agenda. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Gary, did you want to do any introductions to set the scene here?
Just briefly, as we were doing our transportation master plan earlier, the council expressed a desire to talk about transportation from a high level. And with the general plan coming up and a requirement to have transportation discussed in the general plan, how would the general plan deal with transportation? What's the relationship? And so we have our consultants from Design Workshop who will be here to lead us through that discussion and talk about transportation as it relates to the general plan at a very high level, where we've asked them to spend about a half hour in presentation and then leave the rest of the time for discussion. However, if someone does have a question during their presentation, please raise your hand, and I'm sure they would like to answer that question. And we're excited. They have a lot of experience with general plans and also with transportation planning. And they've worked all over the country. And that's one of the reasons why we hired them, is for their expertise in dealing with general plans in particular, and with transportation. So with that, Becky and Brooks, take it away.
Great, thank you. And hello, everybody. And I just wanted to share our appreciation and how excited we are to be able to work with you and the city and the community on the general plan, and really working on defining, the future for Provo. It's a privilege for us, and we take that assignment very seriously. And we're just getting started in this process, but really very excited. So thank you. And at this point, can I share my screen? Someone give me the ability to do that? The host?
You should be able to do that now.
Okay, thank you. I should have checked that earlier. My apologies. Okay, so I'm going to go through this as was mentioned, very high level, touch on a few things that I think will kind of help set the scene for what kind of the transportation element in a general plan. And be able to show you just a couple of examples. These are just little snippets of how we have integrated transportation and thought about transportation in planning, in long range planning. And this hopefully is the last time I use the word transportation by itself, because we really talk about it as mobility, because it's going to come in a lot of different forms. You all have, certainly made the decision to update your general plan. Why update it? Required by the state. And it's over 10 years old, and a lot has changed in Provo and the Wasatch Front and Utah with population growth. And really making sure that the plan itself as a document should be friendly and concise and easy to read and use. And now I'm getting a message, my internet connection is unstable, so that makes me nervous. So let's see how this goes. And then certainly it will recommend smart growth and sustainability strategies. So just an overview of the general plan. You know this, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. A general plan is a guidebook. It helps to integrate all of the planning work, the recent planning work that has been done, and be able to kind of zipper those things together. It is a long range planning tool to help with decision making, thinking about priorities, and it certainly reflects the community's vision, and it should be an inspiration for the future. This is a way that can communicate, this is what we want to be or become. What it's not zoning. It's not a set of land use codes and regulations, requirements and ordinances, and it's not a detailed budget document. In fact, it's not specific or detailed in a lot of different ways. And that's why it's called a general plan. And I was just sharing the other day that we think it's really wonderful that Utah uses the term general plan for this document, because we work in other states where they call the same document a comprehensive plan, and that tends to cause a lot of confusion. Typical elements are listed here, the things that would be, some of these are required, some of these are important to be in a general plan, and these categories and the names of these categories will be customized for you. So as it relates to the general plan and mobility, we'll certainly update the population projection, take into account that the city has limitations in its geographic expansion, really look at multimodal. This isn't just about the car. It goes way beyond the car, and to start to give some importance to, or continue to give importance to, other modes of transportation. And part of that is because you can't build your way out of a problem with more roads. Most places can't, and some places shouldn't try. And then it's obviously really imperative to address the environmental and sustainability issues relating to air and water quality, as well as financial sustainability. And we use this term a lot in planning for the future, that the past is not necessarily the path to the future. So now I'm just going to touch on a couple of examples in other places. So this is Hot Springs, Arkansas, a very recently completed general plan, or in Arkansas, it's a comprehensive plan. And this is where we looked at transportation and how it connects the neighborhoods to really create character and healthy neighborhoods, and taking into account the very distinct attributes of this community. And so we really talked about transportation in a way about infrastructure that moves us, the connectivity of bicycles and pedestrians, and how that integrates or doesn't with automobiles. And then I know you can't read this, but it was really just for the categories to show, as we worked through this general plan and we thought about transportation or infrastructure that moves us, we listed some pretty specific items of things to consider or explore, things that would need some more planning or studying, what a policy might be that comes as a result of that effort, and then how do you implement it? And then what's the action, the level investment, who's responsible for it, when might this happen, short-term, long-term? So this ended up being a really important tool for first of all, the information. A lot of the information came from the community and the community engagement that we did here, but it helps to then help prioritize the 92 things that you often end up with when you think about what the future needs to accomplish. Another example is how we integrate land use and transportation into a single approach. And this comprehensive planning perspective to reflect how users interact with an area. And I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of where we've done that. So this is just to show the process of integrated corridor planning approach. And the box highlighted on the left column is about analysis and determining key issues and opportunities. And then in the second phase, which is the box on the right, is how does that turn into specific recommendations that would be part of the transportation element in the general plan. This is a project for a town outside of Omaha, Nebraska called La Vista. And the upper right-hand picture is people participating in a game that we created called Vistaopoly. And these different colored cards reflected different land uses. And this was a very key transportation corridor for this community. And so we had folks just kind of say, what types of uses do you think land uses should go where along this, this transportation corridor? And it was really then fascinating to take kind of the collection of that, almost a collage, and then have that reflected in a more specific kind of development plan. Another example of how this gets integrated is thinking about connections and mobility. What is the city's development assets? How do you connect that to green infrastructure? And how does that get reflected in character and identity? So all of these things you may not think about with transportation and mobility, but we see this as very important in integrating the approach for the general plan. Another example is looking at different travel patterns and then modeling the different scenarios. So, 3 scenarios of the differing levels of investment, different levels of community health, importance to the vehicle, what's the role of transit, bicycle, and pedestrians. The project that we're working on right now is in Adams County, Colorado. And as part of that comprehensive plan, we started to look at the transportation challenges and opportunities to help inform the things that we should be studying and asking and analyzing. And the list looks something like this of what are defining the barriers to the multimodal travel, safety being a paramount issue, congestion and transit. So, these are challenges that we feel like in the comprehensive plan have to be addressed as an opportunity. And then in this example, this isn't necessarily a general plan related, but I could very much see where a general plan might make a recommendation for something like this. And this is a pilot project. We're really big believers and have seen such success in taking perhaps a really big idea on how to transform streets and the right of way, but test them out first. So this is an example in Avon, Colorado, where we had, a big vision. We're going to take this boulevard and we're going to remove some lanes of traffic, and we're going to put in bike lanes and some different parking and make this just a really happy place. And folks weren't really seeing the vision as much as we were. So the next summer, we put in this pilot project. So we did everything that was suggested, but through paint. So we painted lanes and we, put in these different crosswalks so that everyone could really try it out. And we asked the community, we asked visitors, surveying them throughout the summer, what they liked, what didn't work. And it was a critical step before making a big investment in constructing the changes to this street. Just as a side note, the town administrator was very excited and a proponent of back-end angled parking. And most of the folks kind of working on this project weren't nearly as excited as she was. But we really had to try it out. So that was part of what was striped in here. And nearly unanimously, it was the most complained about piece of the proposed plan. So great, right? So it wasn't constructed, and we were able to actually do a different parking configuration when the real money was spent. And then just the final piece here is just to show a specific example about what transportation and mobility might look like in a general plan. So this takes, and this is the level of goals and strategy. So I'll read this because I think it's pretty relevant. So a goal: provide multiple connections between neighborhood, citywide, and regional systems that safely and effectively move people through, into, and out of the city while mitigating traffic congestion. A lot of things went into that bucket, but then there was definition of 7 strategies that would be able to achieve that goal. And in this particular case, there's about, can't remember the exact number, but something about 8 goals relating to transportation and mobility, with about 5, on average, 5 strategies to achieve each of those. And then we also then looked at some of the specific strategies and help it at a very high level in the general plan to say how much order of magnitude would this cost and how much time would it take. And this is what you would typically find in a general plan as far as the level of information, but it helps to show examples of what you can do and what is going to be the effort to do it. The element that follows this is to prioritize these. So this is, gets to be a pretty long list, but what's most important? And in some cases, most important might be the things that can be the easier, bigger wins. So maybe you get something that's a little easier that you could do early while you're working on the capital or the funding for a bigger investment with something that has the $3 signs beside it. And then finally, I think the important part, this is part of the transportation element, but is in essence part of every element in the general plan, is about how are you going to measure success? And so in this project in Midtown outside of Houston, Texas, they said, we want to reduce carbon. We want to dramatically increase the tree canopy. We want dogs to be welcome. So this was some goals. They said, if we achieve this, then we know that we are on a really clear path to the future that we all desire. So that, I think I did that in a lot quicker than 30 minutes maybe, but, and I did see a few questions come up, but I wasn't quite sure. So do you want to just chime in with a discussion, comments? Gary, how would you like to do this?
Any questions from the council or?
I'll proffer one. When you get into the planning of the general plan and that, what kind of input do you want from the council, and what are your plans to engage the public with respect? I know you'll do it broadly, but specifically with transportation.
Yeah, so great couple of questions. And with transportation, I mean, we will address that along with everything else. So we're not going to have a separate track for transportation because transportation also fundamentally integrates with land use, even parks and trails. So it won't have its separate topic, but it absolutely will be part of the discussion every time. For your first question about council, there's multiple ways that we would hope to participate with council or council to participate in this process. So one is we will be creating what we're calling the general plan work group, and that will be some broad representation of key stakeholders. Robert and Gary are working on suggestions on who that might be. We see that to be a group of 15 people or so, tends to be a good size. But we also want to make sure that there is someone from Planning Commission and someone from Council in that group. So they are seeing that and participating in the week-to-week activities of this planning process, and can then report out or discuss with with Council, with the Planning Commission, as things are ongoing. A second element is to have Council participate in all of the public engagement that we do. And, for now, we're planning on all of the community engagement to be virtual and online, and we've had tremendous success with that the last 7 months. But even if it was in person of some shape or form, we would hope that Council would come and participate in that. And then the third way is that either ourselves or staff will be giving you periodic updates at kind of milestones in this process, and have the opportunity for discussion and input. As it relates to the community engagement question, we are just starting to really put some detail to that plan, the community engagement plan, this week. But we imagine that in late November, early December will be our first community engagement window, and that will be seeking input on vision. So what's the vision for the community, and what are some key issues and opportunities? Right now, we are kind of summarizing the existing conditions and of all different aspects of things, and identifying those key issues and opportunities, and that will translate into surveys and online engagement for community input. And then often we will kind of start to coalesce what we're hearing, and then go back out to the community again and say, do you agree? What do you think about this? And then as the kind of goals and strategies start to get drafted based on the input and all the information that we have received, we have the community engage in helping to prioritize those things. So that's a broad overview of how that might work.
And Cliff, as it relates to transportation, in particular as an element of the general plan, we anticipate using the Transportation and Mobility Advisory Committee, TMAC, to run things through to, there's a member from Planning Commission on TMAC. There's a liaison from the council on TMAC. And as one of the participants here tonight, we have Clancy Black, who is the chair of TMAC. And we would have that group look at and make recommendations on the general plan in general, but on transportation issues more in particular.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond a little bit. I appreciate Mrs. Zimmerman's comment about kind of the integration of transportation with the rest of the general plan and dealing with it kind of holistically in combination. And you also earlier mentioned transportation and mobility, and I appreciate that as well. I don't think transportation is our goal. We're not trying to maximize transportation. We want to use transportation as a tool to achieve mobility. I don't think our goal is to maximize the number of vehicle miles traveled. We're not even trying to, make those as many, to make it as efficient as possible to travel as many miles as possible. We're looking for mobility, the ability to conveniently access your daily destinations, be it work or the grocery store or school or all of those things, and that can't be accomplished by treating transportation as its own issue. It really needs to be integrated in how we design our communities and how we approach the whole transportation system. So I'm very glad to hear you talk about those things, and I'm glad that that's your approach.
Thanks. And Mr. Harding, if I could respond to your comment in the chat window, what we found with back and angled parking is that those people who struggle with parallel parking are just paralyzed by back and angled parking. It's just so much harder. So anyway, that was the thing. It's like, and then you throw like snow on top of that, and it just, that folks were, I mean, we're also a creature of habit. So you introduce something new, and I think change is always hard, but that was the biggest complaint is I struggle with parallel parking. So this is extra hard.
And I'd like to maybe just add a little commentary too, to express appreciation for this kind of forward-thinking approach that I think we really need and want in our community. And I think you'll find that as a council, we're very supportive of moving in that direction. I think the community largely is, although both we as a council and the larger community, of course, can always benefit from education about why these things matter and what kinds of differences they can make. I don't know exactly how to prioritize our own goals. We haven't, had a rigorous conversation about whether or not we want to have goals, how we would measure success, as you were pointing out. But we did talk briefly when we were talking about the transportation master plan about the desirability, for example, of maybe setting some goals for reducing vehicle trips and vehicle miles, and just in general, reducing our dependence on automobile transportation, mainly because, as you may be already well aware, we have a problem with inversion in Provo, and that's where we can make a direct impact. I mean, I think there's a general concern about carbon emissions in the city and on the council. I don't know how strongly people will feel about making that a specific goal, although I certainly would be interested in that. But I do think in some sense it doesn't matter as much in Provo because there's such an overlap between air pollution and what also helps the climate. And so it does seem to be a goal that I think has more traction with the public. It is more measurable. It's more directly impactful, I think, when we, can look a year or 2 or 3 or 5 down the road and see that our vehicle miles and average vehicle trips per household has been shifted because of some more thoughtful and approaches to transportation and mobility. Anyway, just some background for you. I think that's certainly what I think is on our minds is not maybe just adding to that idea of mobility. I think we're kind of one of the big, larger targets is air quality and finding ways to improve the health of the community as a result of not only improving the air, but maybe even improving the activity level of our citizens, in terms of opting for walking or biking or using public transportation when that's more readily available and more attractive and more user-friendly.
Well, and you brought two things to mind. So one is with air quality, I believe that, every city needs to do their part, but it's a regional issue as well. And so, likely what you would see in a general plan are both of those things. What can you do as a city and people who live there? And then secondly, what is that recommendation to participate at a regional level and get the attention of the other jurisdictions that collectively is what it's going to take to make a difference. So that you might see kind of two parts of that as it relates to particularly environmental issues. The second thing that came to mind as you were speaking is just that how the change in technology is changing mobility. And so, a year ago, probably like the number one issue, and it was either pro or con, were scooters. And, what was the impact of the Lime scooters, and did we want them in our city or not? And how do we not have them, just thrown all over the sidewalks? And the pandemic really reduced dramatically the use of those. They've actually been taken out of multiple cities. But now what is the game changer are e-bikes. So you've got these, electric bicycles that people are now willing to ride a bike because it's assisted and pretty darn easy that was never capable, but was never able to do that before. I mean, you can go up the hills that you would have never done under your own power. And I think that is going to be a big game changer for mobility in cities going forward. And I think over time, we'll start to see the price of those go down. But it's just, just an example of, even, a year or two ago, talking about mobility was different than what it is today and is different than what it'll be tomorrow.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I'm really excited that we have you here today. I'm very excited about this process. I've been hoping for a new general plan for years, literally. So this is very encouraging. I think every community that you work with will probably say the same thing, but Provo is unique. And so we really hope and expect to get unique solutions for Provo. Like most of Utah, we're on the grid, but our street system, our mobility systems are interrupted by a freeway, they're interrupted by a river, and they're interrupted by railroad tracks. And so we just will have to rely on you for some really custom and local solutions that can improve connectivity and mobility in our community. So thanks.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Harding.
Just wanted to respond real quick with the idea about everyone doing our part and then working together as a region. I do think Provo has an ability perhaps to affect the broader area a little bit more than maybe some communities, just because we are a hub for commerce, for education, for government. And so we do have a lot of daytime visitors. And so our choices as far as prioritization of roads and mass transit and whatnot not only affects our residents, but also our daytime visitors.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just for your information, we are working on a list of names for that. I don't know, I can't remember what committee name you gave it, but the steering committee, I guess, we should be pretty close to getting those names put together.
Great, fantastic.
All right, any other comments or questions? Well, I think this is a really positive development, and we're really grateful to work with you. I think we're, just echoing what Ms. Ellsworth was saying, I think we're overdue for this kind of really creative, forward-thinking and integrated approach, and we very much look forward to a high-quality product. And we're appreciative of, I've said this to Gary, and it's part of the reason for this retreat, but we think we know where we want to go, but we're not experts, right? And so getting really good ideas from you in the process, and I like the process that you laid out. I think being able to deliberate as a council, getting public input, and fine-tuning what goes into the general plan in the end is going to be a really really helpful. But we'll continue to rely on your expertise and experience to inspire ideas that we can wrestle with and deliberate about.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Ellsworth, I think one of the things that we are staunch believers in is that a general plan is the community's plan. Like, it's not our plan, it's the community's plan. But what we are able to bring, kind of per what Mr. Hanley was saying, is we're able to bring the perspective, I would say, kind of windows on the world, if you will, or to understand best practices, what's worked, and is equally important, what hasn't worked in other communities, and to be able to share those experiences in this process. So that's I think that's a key part of our role here. It's to help facilitate your plan in the best way that it can help with this guideline for your future.
Thanks for that. I visited with Todd Johnson a few weeks ago, and I have complete and utter faith in design workshops. So
Okay. I'm sure that was not a short conversation.
It was really great.
Council Chair, we're going to lose Becky and Brooks here at 5 our time. They're on the road, I think, and have other commitments. And so, though, if you do have any questions that come up, they are going to get on YouTube and watch this later. And so if questions for them do come up, feel free to go ahead and ask them, and they'll be able to hear the question in the context in which it comes up. And Councilmember Ellsworth, as I always tell my wife, we are special and unique, just like every other city. So,
yeah. And we are going to, as was mentioned, we will be watching the recording of this later, because we're fascinated to hear what the presenters after us have to say. So we will definitely be catching up on that at a later time. But I have to apologize for my mountain attire. I'm actually up at Steamboat, Colorado today on a site visit. So I've been bundled up outside in the snow. So I've got the hat hair and everything else. So apologies. I kind of show up like I just came out of the woods, because I did.
Yeah, we feel really bad for you.
Okay.
Becky, what would you like to what would you like to walk away from today's meeting with?
Well, I think a couple of things have already happened. One is to actually get to see you now instead of later in the process. So this was actually a special treat to be able to have this time with you today. And I think that the other piece I feel like I've already gotten a lot of is just what's on your mind. And we'll be able to talk more about what is really important to each of you. We won't go around the grid to do that now, but but that's something that I hope that you will share with us. And one of the things that we talk about, and we had this conversation with Gary and Robert already, is what we call critical success factors. So when this general plan is done, which includes the transportation or mobility element, what is it that it has to have accomplished? And that's what I want to learn from each of you, because I think each of you may have a different answer to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? I'm sure we'll have more as we go forward, as Gary mentioned. So we appreciate your availability, and if not today, certainly on other occasions.
Great. Well, thank you for the invitation to be able to share this time with you.
You bet. All right. I think we'll move on then to item number 2, and we wish you well in your travels. Look forward to more conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Item number 2, presentation from the Utah Department of Transportation to discuss their key priorities in the future, particularly how these affect and involve Provo. And this, we are joined by guests Andrea Olson, Jaron Robertson, and or Eric Rasband. I don't know what the and or means, but we're happy to have you here.
I think I'm carrying the torch, Eric Rasband, Region 3 Planning Manager. Elizabeth, do you have my presentation that you can share the screen?
I have it here. Let me just get it up on screen. You'll see a notification that the control of PowerPoint presentation, whatever, is being shared with you.
Very good.
When that happens, just click to accept.
I didn't need to, it looks like. Oh,
there you go. So go ahead and make sure you click to accept, then you'll be able to move around and hit the arrows as you'd like to scroll through your presentation.
very good. Well, Mayor, council members, staff, we appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with you today. We're going to talk about the projects for UDOT that are outlined in phase 1 of the regional transportation plan. I'm excited to see some of our partners from UTA and from the Mountainland Association of Governments, as many of the projects that we're going to talk about have overlap between all of us as we move forward. So thank you for the opportunity. It looked like, yep, there we go. So we'll start off with the first project that we have, which is one that you're probably all familiar with. It's the widening and reconstruction of 500 West from Cougar Lane down to 500 South. That project is ongoing. We understand that a majority of the work will be completed fairly soon, before, I would say before the snow flies, but that's already happened. And then the additional work will be finished up in the spring of next year. So basically it's adding raised medians, planter boxes, improved sidewalk and pedestrian facilities on the side, as well as the active transportation path along the corridor. The next project is a pavement reconstruction project that we have funded in year 2023. It's for 300 South between 500 West and University Avenue. It's one where we're going to need to do a full depth reconstruction, converting the asphalt to concrete and improve the shoulders with some potential right-of-way impacts, as well as raised median. Our vision is very similar to the section of 300 South on the east side of University Avenue. There are some issues that are currently not funded under the existing project. Active transportation paths on the side of the road are not funded. Utility updates are not funded. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Central Corridor Bus Rapid Transit, which I believe Mary De Lamar Schaefer visited with you last week on. That was a project that those bus lanes were not anticipated when this project was originally scoped, and we would need to figure out a way to address dedicated lanes or decide whether or not to go into a mixed flow lane for that bus system as we move forward. The next project is the Central Corridor project. This has been a very fun project to work on, working closely with Mary DeLamar Schaefer, Laura Hansen here on the team, as well as our representatives from Mountainland Association of Governments, Sean Seeger, Sean Elliott, Andrew Jackson. We appreciate the support that we received. This project was initiated by the local governments, and actually financial contribution came from each of the local governments. And then Mountainland Association of Governments funded a pretty big portion of the project. UTA kicked in some funding, as well as UDOT, as we move forward. It's a bus rapid transit project in dedicated right-of-way where possible and in mixed flow. We are just getting ready to finalize this project in the next few weeks. The preferred alternative would tie in at the Adobe location up at the point of the mountain in Lehigh. There's a blue line you see that's dashed and dotted that would tie into a potential transit project that UTA is evaluating tied to the prison redevelopment. If that project goes through, there would be a connection to the Draper Frontrunner Station with that prison redevelopment project. Continuing down the UTA owned right-of-way that is east of I-15 until just south of 2100 South, where it crosses under I-15 and starts to parallel State Street. Union Pacific Railroad has some customers in that area that can need to be served on a continued basis. So at that point, we would jump out of the railroad right away and transition into State Street. Moving down into American Fork, the transit line would transition over into the American Fork downtown area, continue south along State Street at Pleasant Grove Boulevard. At North County Boulevard, the project turns south and picks up the business areas near Pleasant Grove Boulevard, as well as some redevelopment that Linden is looking at on 700 North, just west of Geneva Road. Then it continues over to State Street, continues south on State Street. Orem has updated their general plan, their State Street plan, with nodes of high density, both retail, office, and residential along many of these stations that are shown in the circles along State Street. And so we would take advantage of that and then continue, for Vineyard, we would create a branch system at 800 North and State Street and allow connection over to Vineyard and the town center that they're planning to develop in the next few years, as well as pick up the hospital in Orem at 800 West and 800 North. Near University Place in Orem, we would take advantage of the connection and the station that exists south of University Place on University Parkway, providing a connection to the UVX system, and then continue south on State Street down the Provo and Orem Hill, past the Utah Valley Regional Medical Center, which we believe is the third largest employer in the county, and then continue down 500 West to 300 South. At 300 South, it would turn and go east to University Avenue and have another tie-in to the UVX system at the station just south of 300 South, and then ultimately tie into the Provo Frontrunner Station. I don't have a close-up. I thought of that after I had sent the imagery, so I'm sorry for that. The next project is State Route 114, which is Provo Center Street from 500 West, moving to the west over I-15 and Geneva Road. It turns and goes north into Orem, Vineyard, and then Pleasant Grove, Linden as well. We have a project to redo the pavement. It'll be basically a mill of that existing surface and an overlay for pretty much the entire segment. That is funded in year 2023. And then there are actually two projects that are in the UDOT project prioritization process, project number 25 and project 59, that would look to add improvements on both Center Street from 1600 West to Geneva Road, and then from Geneva Road on up to the city boundary. That section, the Geneva Road section is project 25 on our prioritization list, and the section of Center Street is project 59. Just a order of magnitude, it's all of the phase one projects throughout the state that are included in that project prioritization for phase one that are fiscally constrained. In other words, we have a funding mechanism to pay for those projects. And there are approximately 91 projects on that list. So 25 and 59 kind of gives you an idea of where those projects would come in that prioritization ranking. The Provo North interchange is an environmental project that we are underway right now. We're just in the process of completing phase one, which is doing some existing conditions, data collection, some basic analysis, moving forward, and then we plan to move into phase two. This is sometimes referred to as the 820 North interchange, and I want to be very cautious that we don't want to predetermine that outcome. We need to allow the NEPA process to follow its normal process, that we will evaluate many alternatives throughout that process based on public input as well as agency, local government input. The NEPA process will require us to evaluate the no build or no action alternative, and then other locations or options that would be considered viable moving forward. For instance, an interchange location at 2000 North or at 1460 North, 820 North, 500 North. Those are potential options that could be evaluated, but it would need to go through this scoping process. The key is no decisions have been made at this time, and we need to allow the NEPA process to complete as we move forward. This is many of you are probably familiar with the old bridge viaduct along University Avenue over the Union Pacific and the UTA railroad tracks, just north of the Front Runner station. That bridge was built in 1966. It is structurally safe at this point in time, and there in the near future, we'll need to either invest in some maintenance work to continue the life of that structure or consider a replacement. We recently completed a concept report that evaluated traffic conditions based on year 2040 traffic needs. That analysis identified a need for 2 lanes in each direction, as well as active transportation improvements on the side of the roadway. As we move forward, we would need to go into an environmental assessment to clear it. And similar to the Provo North environmental impact statement, we would have to evaluate alternatives as we move forward. We would likely need to update the analysis to year 2050 traffic needs, at which point in time we believe that the need would to 3 lanes in each direction. And we're concerned about those additional needs because of the impact to the adjacent businesses. So it's a little bit difficult to see these lines on the concept drawing shows this access road here on the south. Well, it's on the east side of the structure that serves those businesses. That 2040 concept report with 2 lanes in each direction has a cost of about $47 million. We understand there are approximately 9 to 10 businesses that if we had to add another 24 feet of pavement on a new structure would be disrupted, and that could increase the cost of this viaduct improvement by as much as 80 or $90 million. So it's a concern as we move forward, but we'll need to continue to do some analysis in the environmental assessment. We're currently identifying or trying to identify funding for that environmental assessment to move forward so that we can have some answers in time to decide whether to do some maintenance work or to focus on reconstructing that structure in the future. So those are the projects that we currently have identified in phase 1 of the plan. So from now to 2030. And are there any questions from the council?
Any questions, Mr. Shipley?
Yeah, back to the study regarding a potential interchange or transportation from the freeway. You mentioned that we need to get public input about those different locations. I just wonder and maybe this is my, not knowing how this normally works, but when you do a study and a study shows, where this potentially should take place, how much does public input potentially change where you, with your study, have gotten feedback that it should be a certain place? I mean, obviously you'd be open to adjusting that, but I guess I'm just concerned that if the study shows a certain place and there's a lot of public outcry that they don't want it in that certain place, and then another neighborhood doesn't have as much outcry, that somehow we change what our study reflects because of how loud a certain neighborhood is.
It's a iterative process, and it's a process that takes time and effort. Data analysis is definitely part of the decision process moving forward. But the way the federal government has established the National Environmental Protection Act, it provides an opportunity for the public to have input. Certainly, we would look to that input and understand how it could influence the overall solution as we move forward. But yeah, it's part of the process.
As a follow-up to that, will the council be receiving the study feedback unencumbered by the public input? Does that make sense? So will it be clear to us what the study's feedback was before it starts to get changed potentially by the amount of public input that happens?
The process would require us to go out to the public pretty early in the environmental process to gather input. And it's called the scoping meeting, where we sit down, we identify the purpose and the need, why we're evaluating this as a potential project. And then we would take that input, and that input in that scoping process would allow us, or would provide guidance for us on alternatives to evaluate as we move forward.
Mr. Harding?
Thank you. I had a comment, but I just have to respond to Mr. Shipley's comment. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but a fairly similar project when the I-15 core project was taking place. We kind of went through a similar process. I wasn't on the council at that time, and so this is just memories of my perspective. So, I'm sure there's some mistakes here, but as I recall, there were 4 alternatives identified. One was the UDOT preferred alternative. And I looked at that, and my neighborhood looked at that and said, well, yeah, that looks pretty good. We like that. So I don't think anyone really, gave much feedback. And then from our perspective, so we see what the UDOT preferred alternative is and think, oh, that's great. And then months later, we find out that the final selection selected a different alternative that wasn't the UDOT preferred one. And it heard that another area the city had made, made their displeasure known about the UDOT preferred option, and that might be one of the reasons why we're back here again having this redoing this study now. So anyway, that was just my perspective on the last time we went through this, and so I think that question that Mr. Shipley asked was very important for, I guess, for everyone to be aware of. My actual question, if we could go to the slide on the University Ave overpass.
Can I jump in real quick on
please,
that one
please.
first? I was involved on the I-15 core reconstruction project as well. I think the alternative that you may have thought about or remembered was a collector distributor system adjacent to I-15. That was carried forward in the draft environmental as we worked with the resource agencies, so the Fish and Wildlife, the Army Corps of Engineers, those permitting, those agencies that have permitting authority for a federal process, found that there were wetlands in the area that would be adversely impacted, and that was ultimately the reason why that alternative was not selected with the core project moving forward.
Thank you for filling me in on the rest of the story. That is very helpful. I appreciate that. Okay, so yeah, there we go. On to that. Now this is a high level meeting. I'll try to keep it high level and not really talk about this. I mean, we'll use this as an example, but not really. It's not about this. It's just about the principles that guide our decisions on this. But when I hear this, and I've already forgotten, but a $40 million project might become $130 million in order to move it from 2 to 3 lanes. Because we're projecting out to 2050, and again, this is not my area. I understand that there's others, you I'm sure included, understand this much more than I do. But it seems to me that transportation and the nature of transportation, particularly kind of single occupant, single household vehicles is so much in flux right now with what that's going to look like in the future, as far as whether it's going to be more ride sharing, or will people still have their personal vehicles, and will they be autonomous and all of that. So there's so much when you start looking out 30 more years what the needs will be. And so the idea that we might not do a project, or might or looking ahead, we might buy out a whole bunch of businesses and replace those businesses in order to widen the road. That's again, I'm not saying that I think that's the wrong decision, but that just is a bit alarming to me. And I appreciate the forward looking that UDOT does, but out of necessity. But just that hits me. That just struck me when you described that. It just hit me as I don't admire your position having to make those kind of decisions when so much is in flux, and it strikes me as a bit alarming. So I just wanted to mention that while we were here.
One of the reasons we think that this one needs to be an environmental assessment is one, it would need to qualify, or it needs to have the potential to qualify for federal funding. But also, by having an environmental assessment, we look for alternatives. Currently, this is the only viaduct over the railroad tracks. And we know that Provo is doing some studies at looking at additional crossings, grade separated crossing over the railroad tracks. There could be a scenario that through this environmental analysis that we would do, that rather than disrupting those businesses, we build a new structure at the 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction, and then we invest in a new structure in another location. For instance, Freedom Boulevard or 500 West are options that we would need to evaluate. And so that's part of why we're trying to fund this environmental assessment, so that we can evaluate the options moving forward and make some decisions and ultimately try to provide the best benefit to the traveling public.
I guess
that's encouraging.
Inject a question or comment, a question actually that's related to Mr. Harding's, and then I see Mr. Fillmore has his hand up as well. But I just wanted to jump in because it's related to what he was talking about. I guess it seems like the catch-22 of long-term planning is that you can't always factor in what's going to change in the next 5 or 10 years, and yet you're planning, you're trying to anticipate things that are going to take a long time to plan for and build and make happen. And this came up when, and you may be aware of the conversation that we had, or I don't know if you are, but we discussed our transportation master plan, and there was quite a bit of attention given to the possible interchange at 800 North, and we were talking that through. And I think this was when it was most evident to me that we were planning for the future on the basis of a set of understandable assumptions of past behavior and trends that we see moving forward, when in fact some of those trends are very much not desirable, right? And so we would, meaning just frequency of car travel and so on. And so if the city, I guess the question is, how much does a city's general plan factor in to your ability to determine whether or not something like this ends up being desirable? If say 5 years down the road, you see a change in the data that suggests that there, as a result of good planning and careful, aggressive work on the part of the city, there's actually less traffic flow through a certain area of the city because there are better options for public transportation or active transportation. So does my question make sense? I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of, how do we avoid the problem of creating a future that's based entirely on the past, when the past is actually maybe something that we want to move beyond?
Yep. So that's a very good question and complex in its nature. Let's go to how the general plan or the transportation master plan feeds. And Sean Seeger and team might have some additional information, but the long range plan is updated every 4 years using the best information that we have available to us. That information does include transportation plans, general plans from each of the agencies, the local governments moving forward. We use scientific tools, travel demand modeling to try and predict behavior. And we are constantly trying to update those tools to capture changes in behavior. One of the areas, just this last 8 months, we've seen a significant change in travel and auto travel because people are working from home. During the height of the pandemic, our traffic volumes were 50% of what they normally would be. And then we've been tracking that, and we're now back to approximately 90% of what the traffic volumes were at this time last year. So people are returning to the automobile, but moving then into the next phase. Our partnership with UTA on the UVX project, we've been testing some technology that allows the UVX buses to communicate with the traffic signals, and the traffic signals to communicate back to the buses to give more green time when appropriate for those buses. And that is a technology that is being evaluated throughout the world. And then in addition to that, we see Tesla and what they've done with automating the automobile. There are 5 levels of automation above what Tesla has done, which ultimately include complete automation. And we're trying to understand what those trends are going to be in the future, knowing that is likely something that is going to come to us. It's sometimes a guess, but it's a scientific guess based on the information that we have available to us.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore, and then Mr. Ripley. You're muted, Mr. Fillmore.
Yes, thank you. Eric, I'm just curious, do you have any particular plans in mind for South State Street, the southeast corridor between Provo and Springville?
I believe we just resurfaced that facility and added bike lanes to that area. But outside that, it is not in the regional plan for any additional improvements.
I'm going to ask my colleague Shannon Ellsworth to expand on some thoughts that we have had with respect to the need to improve and enhance that corridor for that particular sector of our city. Shannon? Have we lost her?
She was having audio difficulties earlier. She may still be having them.
Okay, well, see, this has been a subject of some discussion between Shannon and myself, and I believe a couple of other members of the council, that's southeast area lags a bit behind certain other areas of the city in terms of economic development and opportunity. And we wanted to make that perhaps a bit more of a priority in our collaboration with the state. So if she can get back online, maybe we can discuss that when she joins us.
Well,
Shannon, did you hear my invitation?
I did, yes. Yeah, what we're seeing, and this might be a conversation for another day, I hope it is, I don't want to derail this, but South State Street in Provo is about 3.5 miles. There's really high speeds, and there's over 1,000 housing units going in there. So we need to reconsider the purpose of that road and how people will interact with it and get where they need to go and safely.
Yeah. I think that this is an appropriate time to start talking about it in a general plan and a master plan, transportation master plan update. As we look at the demand out to the year 2050, we see an hourglass effect happening in Utah County. The Provo Bay creates that hourglass effect. Really, we only have I-15 and we have State Street that connect Provo to the communities to the south. And so as I-15 continues to serve its need of regional mobility, it will fill up in the near future. I don't know exactly when, but at some point in the future, the current configuration through that area is not going to be adequate to serve the demand. The South County is expected to grow by nearly 250,000 people, and they still want to get into the Provo and Orem area for economic, basically for employment opportunities. And so we will need to evaluate that State Street corridor and consider what it means. The fact that there's more development coming on means that it's going to raise in our priority list as the congestion continues to grow.
Yeah, I think one thing that we have to balance there is if South State Street, what I call South State Street, is kind of a release valve for I-15, and if the road needs to be wide and fast, then we need to kind of reconsider the residential that's going in there. But if there are opportunities to slow speeds and reduce traffic there, then perhaps residential is a more amenable land use. So those are the things that we have to balance right now, where over the last few years, the council has already permitted, like I said, over 1,000 housing units. And all of the kids who live on that side of State Street have to cross the road, a state highway, to get to their elementary schools and do it safely. So yeah, there's just, it's a big puzzle we got to figure out.
Yeah. And that South State Street is a U.S. highway. It's a U.S. designated corridor. So it is focused, the purpose of that road is for regional travel, regional mobility. And so the purpose of it is likely to continue to be a larger road with larger speeds.
And that indicates to me that this council needs to reconsider the land uses adjacent to it so that we aren't encouraging as much residential and we're encouraging more commercial there. Take advantage of that area as a commercial district and less as a residential area.
Mr. Shipley.
Yeah, sorry, something's been bothering me, and I guess I can't let financial things go very well. Between two of the slides, we talked about the south end of 500 West, and we talked about BRT. And you had alluded to the fact that BRT is not finalized yet. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like or how we're going to do it on 500 West. But is there any reason or is there any way that we can coordinate a little better so we don't put medians and trees in the middle of that street and then just tear them out next year or the year after when we do BRT? I mean, I guess I'm just, in my mind, it doesn't make sense that we couldn't coordinate a little bit so that we don't do something in the middle of the road on 500 West and then tear it out potentially with BRT.
Yeah. It just boils down to the checkbook goes so far. And if we can figure out a way to fund those additional improvements along that corridor, then we would love to include it in that project moving forward. Maybe we reduce the scope of the reconstruction and we don't put in the raised medians, knowing that at a future date, bus rapid transit is coming in. Those are issues that we've got to figure out. The bus rapid transit project is likely to be transitioning into an environmental process this spring, which is going to give us more detailed information on what those needs will be. And when unfortunately the pavement is to a point where it needs to be reconstructed. And when that project was originally scoped, bus rapid transit wasn't even on the radar at that point. And so it creates some challenges for sure.
Mr. Harding.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, we talked about the hourglass there east of Provo Bay, and we've got I-15, we have State Street. I'm also hoping that we can extend commuter rail, we can extend BRT type systems so that we can also use those to move people efficiently, conveniently from South Valley into the employment centers.
Agree 100%. We need everything in our toolbox to manage the growth that we're going to expect. It's hard to believe. I grew up in Provo off of 820 North in the Provo River area. My dad still lives there. And for me to see Utah County the way it is today and the population that we have today, and to think that somewhere in the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to have the same population as Salt Lake County does in Utah County. And I start to think about that and what that means. And we need everything available to us to serve the needs as we move forward.
Mr. Black.
Yeah, thanks. Eric, would you mind going to the Central Corridor BRT slide? I just want to pass on, share a short discussion we had in our TMAC meeting 2 or 3 months ago. I think we had a presentation on this project, and we're a bit lamenting the fact that it was using State Street and not University Avenue, just because it'd be excellent if it could tie into Riverwoods and other generators up there. But I'm not sure at the time we knew that the Vineyard spur, so to speak, was an option. And so I just wanted to bring that up, that if there's a possibility to extend that spur all the way along 800 North and then down to Riverwoods, it would connect an additional major employment center, residential area, and 2 major trail systems, Murdoch and Provo River Trail, along that spur. So just wanted to pass that on while we're having the discussion.
I'm going to channel my dear friend, Mary De La Mar Schaefer, and that this project is not to be the solution to every transit need in the county. It's interesting, Clancy, you bring up that alternative that is actually included in the regional plan in the modeling, is as a bus line going around that and making that connection that you described.
Thanks, Eric.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time for this item. We appreciate your being with us, Eric, and for this valuable information.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. We'll move on to item number 3, which is a presentation from the Utah Transit Authority to discuss their plans, how microtransit works and might fit in, and how UTA coordinates with active transportation. And this will be presented by Laura Hanson. This is Mary De La Mar Schaefer, who's joined us. I see Laura.
And I think Mary's going to kick us off.
All right.
I sure am. Thank you. Laura Hanson is the Director of Planning for all of UTA. We also have Jaron Robertson who's with us, and he is the Director of Innovative Mobility Solutions, and he's been running our pilot on microtransit. So Laura and Jaron are going to help me. Just to be clear about my responsibilities, it was fun to be with you all. We talked about the Central Corridor. I'm the Regional General Manager for UTA in Utah County, and I am responsible for all things transit in Utah County and making sure that we have good communication, that we're all working together. And specifically, my team runs all the bus operations out of our facility in Orem. I wanted to say that we have a very unique thing happening in Utah County, and that is between UDOT and UTA and MAG staff. We are in constant communication with each other. I really consider us a very productive team, and we consider all of the cities our clients and #1 customers. Our focus is on how we can respond to the planning needs and the development that's happening in each of your cities, and it's pretty unique. I feel really good about how we all work together. Eric and I worked very closely, and Laura on the Central Corridor project to date, and we'll be working on that going forward. It's gotten to the point where Eric and I travel a lot together talking about Central Corridor, and they call us Merrick. And they can't remember if I work for UDOT or UTA and vice versa. So we think that's a good sign, meaning that the focus is on the transit and the project, not on our institutions. Now, what I would like to say is a framework for our whole conversation with you tonight about transit is that we feel like we have had a very productive and meaningful partnership with Provo City when it comes to transit. And several of you in this meeting tonight have been strong players in helping make sure that the Utah Valley Express launched in a productive way. Certainly the mayor and the mayor's office and Wayne Parker, you all have made a significant difference in how we are having a conversation about transit now, because UVX changed the whole picture. Once UVX launched and we saw the success of that system, then people were now interested in talking about some transit things, and we're very concerned that we get the infrastructure in place before that explosive growth happens, and I know you all are concerned too. So the 3 things that you asked us to address are, we're going to follow through now and talk about our plans, how we see integrating with active transportation, and we're also going to talk about microtransit, which is a really exciting pilot project in UTA. And I want to turn some time over to Laura, and we'll kind of go back and forth between the 3 of us.
Thank you, Mary. Let me see if I can, oh, my notes disappeared. There they are. All right, so as Mary mentioned, I'm UTA's planning director. I think maybe second to Jaron, who you'll hear from in a little bit, I have maybe the best job at UTA because I get to just plan for the future, which is great. One of the things, that I really like about my job and working with local governments is really to figure out how to put the right service in the right place for your communities. And one of the questions we get all the time is, how do you choose what mode to use? And Eric Rasband from UDOT talked a little bit about how alternatives are explored in planning and environmental processes like the Central Corridor. But just kind of stepping up a little bit from that, the mode we select really depends on ridership potential, it depends on funding potential, and also what the community's needs and visions are. Eric talked a little bit about the purpose of a particular road in your community, and its job was really to carry regional traffic. We think of transit very much in the same way, and so each of our modes has a specific purpose or a need that it fits. You guys have commuter rail in your community, though it works best to cover really long distances and really carry people from one region to the next. You don't have light rail at the moment, but there's a good example in Salt Lake City and the Salt Lake County area, and it works best with medium distances and when we have lots of people who are going essentially to the same place at the same time. So you can think of everyone commuting to downtown Salt Lake or to the airport or a major employment center like the University of Utah, but capturing a very large group. You've got a very successful BRT example with UVX. BRT works best when you're carrying medium distances or traveling medium distances. And it works best in smaller markets, so connecting Front Runner to the 2 universities and then back to Front Runner, that doing kind of that circular loop. Streetcar is a mode that we only have one of within the UTA system. Streetcar, we kind of joke, is sort of a walking accelerator. It doesn't really move very fast. It only travels short trips, and it works best for things like you're going out to run some errands or grab lunch at work or something like that, really within a single community. We have a lot of commuter bus in our portfolio, and I think some serving your community. Commuter bus really works when you're traveling long distances, and when you have smaller groups of people going to the same place at the same time. So you fill up a bus with a bunch of people, and then you drop them off in an employment center. Local bus works great for short distances, accommodates a lot of different individuals with multiple destinations and travel times. And then we've been adding some new services to our mode portfolio, like microtransit, which Jaron will tell you about later. And it works really best in low ridership areas and places that are just hard for us to serve with traditional transit. Imagine you have a 40-foot bus and you're weaving through kind of a disconnected well, Thanksgiving Point is a perfect example. Thanksgiving Point is really challenging for us to serve with public transit because it's just kind of like its own little island. So that's a place where something like microtransit might work well. So the question that we would ask really in how we're planning transit for your community and how we're planning with you is how and where is your city growing? What kinds of transit service best fit those needs? What kind of community character fits Provo? Do you envision yourself as an urban center or urban neighborhoods, or is it more of a suburban bedroom community? And maybe there are aspects of that throughout your community. I think when we look at these various different modes that UTA has to work with and what your community's needs are, we can usually match those up and be good partners in helping you accomplish your goals. And I'm very excited. I did not know you were updating your general plan. So this is a really perfect time for us to be collaborating with one another. And I just want to give you an offer of using us as a technical resource as you're going through that planning process. We'd love to be at the table. We have a service planner that works with Mary down in Orem in our Timpanogos business unit, and he knows the area very well, and we'd be more than happy to be resources with you on that. We also have an open data portal that provides a lot of really good information about ridership and routes and boardings, things that are very useful in a general planning process. And so I'll plug the link to that into the chat box just so that you have that for the future. And then Mary, I'll turn it back to you.
So I wanted Laura to go through some of that so you could have an idea of how we think about providing service and how we do sort of our tenets for planning. And part of that includes, we're thinking about, are we trying to do a transit effort that's a ridership, the emphasis on ridership like UVX, where it's really bringing a lot of riders and it comes very fast and very frequent, and we're looking at volume? Or are we looking at a coverage sort of model? And we have a bus route 831 that sort of wanders through Provo and then makes its way over to UVU, and it hits a lot of different places, but it's not something that we would call high ridership, but it covers a lot of territory. And those are value judgments that we need you all to help work with us on. Or what's the value, as Laura pointed out? What's important to you? Do you have people that have no other options perhaps, or limited options, or it's a place that's needs some access, and we may do something that's coverage. And so the cost per rider is very different than like a UVX, where we're carrying close to what a light rail line carries. So UVX just before COVID had about 12,000 boardings per day, very close to what the Green Line does at a very much reduced cost. I want to talk a little bit about what COVID has happened to us, and that, of course, like everybody, including all of you, is that we don't quite know what our future is. We know things have changed dramatically, and we hope and look forward to a post-COVID time. But we do know what it's done to ridership back in April when everything shut down. We reduced our service by about 50%, and of course saw a dramatic decrease in ridership. When the students came back in August, we increased our increased our service to about 91% of what we had before. Probably the most dramatic change that we made is that UVX is going on every 10 minutes versus every 6 minutes during its peak service. And that's how we adjusted for ridership during COVID. Nonetheless, We still have quite a bit of ridership. It surprises me how many people continue to ride UVX, 5,000 to 6,000 boardings a day. And that certainly shows us, and on the 850, which is the precursor to the Central Corridor project, shows us that there are many people who need transit to get to where they need to go, or they choose transit because they may only have one vehicle in their home and they've got two people working or more working. So we see that the need is apparent. Laura's going to go through now and talk about, we have a 5-year plan that's getting presented, I believe, to our trustees tomorrow. So Laura's going to give you the highlights. These are from meetings we've had with Provo City, from understanding your plans and understanding the ridership of what we think needs to happen in the county as we go forward on transit. And some of it addressed concerns that you brought up during Central Corridor, I think. So Laura, if you want to take away.
Thank you, Mary. Before I dive into that, I noticed that Ms. Ellsworth added a comment in the chat asking if this S-line is successful and if ridership's what it was expected. You know, the S-line is not designed to carry a ton of people. And so it's really intended to serve those local trips. One of, I think, the lessons learned for UTA with the S-line is that the cost of the fare versus the distance that you're traveling doesn't always make it worthwhile. In some cases, it's easier to just ride a bike or walk and save your $2.50. And so I think, you know, we're constantly learning as an agency. And I think if we ever do another streetcar line, we'll keep that in mind. I think one of the huge reasons that UVX is so successful is because the fare is free right now. And if UTA could do some sort of promotional service like that on the S-line, it might really increase ridership. One thing that it has been tremendously successful at is stimulating economic development. The growth that has happened around that corridor has been really phenomenal. And if you're ever interested in taking a tour, I'd reach out to either Salt Lake City or South Salt Lake to ask them to give you some information about it. It's been great.
I got to jump in on that one because I was working for Salt Lake City in the Community and Economic Development Department. That was the lead on the S-line with UTA when that was being developed. And it was the singular goal of the city for that to be a development stimulator. It was also part of a vision for a greater streetcar system that hasn't materialized. So it looks like a bit of an orphan because the loop, the streetcar loop, was that vision faded away. I would also like to add that Salt Lake City did something very unique. It was started when I was there and finished when I went to UTA. Is they did their own transit master plan, and they did it in order to, they wanted to invest money in transit where they wanted it. That UTA couldn't stretch their dollars to cover all the things that they wanted to cover. And so Salt Lake City, and Laura was critical and instrumental in getting that contract to work. They've invested, I think, $9 million in transit in areas that they want to stimulate certain things to happen in the community, and bought their own transit. So it's an interesting model, something that we can look at and watch. So Laura, if you want to talk about 5-year plan, that's great.
Yeah, thanks for chiming in, Mary. So on the 5-year plan, we unfortunately got bumped from our board meeting agenda tomorrow. So it will actually be next week when we present to them. But UTA, I think, for our local governments, how we do service planning has been a little bit of a mystery to a lot of folks. And one of our goals with this 5-year plan is to sort of demystify that process, provide a lot of predictability, and really let you know, here's what we're thinking about as an agency. Tell us, you know, help us shape this so that it meets your needs as a community. So developed during this pandemic, as you know, developing a plan, a 5-year plan is really challenging right now, but we had a few goals. One, we'd like to increase ridership overall. Our ridership's quite a bit down right now because fewer people are riding public transit, but we expect that to rebound. We want to strengthen customer confidence, and we want to improve our financial stability. Our budget projections are a little bit uncertain. Just we rely on sales tax, just like any city does, and it's challenging to budget when you're a little uncertain of what that's going to look like moving forward. But generally, in this 5-year plan, you will see a general move towards more all-day service. That's in response to some changing travel patterns that we've seen as more people, essential workers, continuing to use transit throughout this whole pandemic to get to their jobs. And you'll see more longer hours, earlier and later service, and some new applications for innovative mobility solutions. And we're just going to keep teasing you about that until Jaren gets on. You know, because we don't know exactly what our future is going to hold for us, we're thinking of this plan more as a vision or a roadmap. It is not a prescriptive list of changes. There are some new ideas presented in the plan. Many of them will address actually some of the challenges and needs that you mentioned today, serving the Riverwoods area, for example, South Provo. But every idea that's presented here is just a concept at this point. There will be multiple opportunities for public engagement around all of these and working with the local governments to make sure that it really works for you. We're going to update this plan every 2 years, and that gives us a great opportunity to respond to planning efforts like this general plan update that you're doing. As next time we update this plan, we'll be able to take all of that information and plug it right into our plan. It also responds to or starts to lay the foundation for some other planning studies that are going on right now, like the Central Corridor study that Eric mentioned. And also we are just kicking off a planning study to address connecting the communities south of Provo, so all the way down to Santaquin, back to our transit network. In the MAG RTP, it identifies a commuter rail extension. And so that is one of the planning studies that we are just embarking upon. So this 5-year plan is going to be available for public comment and review in its final form or in a draft form mid-November. We encourage you all to take a look at that and provide your input. And then once we have this vision adopted, then we'll really get to work with you in making sure that the individual changes that are implemented best meet your community's needs. I'll turn it back to you, Mary.
So fundamentally, I think we feel like we have routes in the right place, but they don't come often enough, and they start too late and end too early. There's some connectivity problems, like certainly our route that goes out to Riverwoods. It's a long ride out, a long ride back. If you're trying to get front runner, one of our goals in that 5-year plan is to have that bus route go out. So it does go out to Center Street to Arms City Center. We'd like to see it continue out to the Vineyard front runner and then down to UVU so that we start to close some of these loops and that transit can make more sense as people are trying to make connections, particularly to a front runner. One of the questions you asked about was active transportation. My answer is yes, please. Transit only works well when there's good active transportation side by side. And I certainly feel like Provo has been a leader in that. And we've worked closely with Austin and others at the city. We love your scooter program. We look forward to the bike share program when that launches. UVX is a good example of how UDOT, MAG, and UTA worked very hard on active transportation along with the transit, improving bike lanes, adding bike lanes, pedestrian crosswalks, and pedestrian access. All of those things are critical to the first and last mile, which if they don't exist, then your transit really struggles. So we look for any opportunity that we can to partner or lead on any active transportation that can help people use transit better. I don't know if y'all have other questions, but I'm going to let Jaren talk about microtransit, and then we're ready to be open to whatever you'd like to talk about. So Jaren, if you want to head out on microtransit.
Thank you, Mary. Again, my name is Jaren Robertson. I'm the director of the UTA's Innovative Mobility Solutions Department. Quickly, we're just tasked with identifying and testing new and emerging technologies and really looking at how they support the overall transportation network and really bringing about a realm of improved operations and a customer experience, and really tasked to look to how we capitalize on these new and emerging technologies, again, to improve transit in general. Most notably, what you've seen that has come out of our office in UTA is the microtransit pilot in southern Salt Lake County. And our autonomous shuttle pilot, in fact, in partnership with UDOT, came out of this department too. But really to get into microtransit and what it's all about, as we've been talking about it, is microtransit is really an innovative form of on-demand transportation that is really, it allows us to operate in a coverage-based model, utilize shared rides, and most importantly, this on-demand aspect and dynamically dispatching and routing. And so essentially what we do with microtransit, and if anyone has seen our service in Southern Salt Lake County, is using on-demand technologies, we geofence a service area and say within the service area, you really have the opportunity to use this service in any way you need, as long as you're using it, again, within the service area during the days and hours that we operate. And so I'm going to cheat a little bit and tell you to make it most comparable. It is much like a Lyft or Uber service, but I do want to put the caveat that it is very much has a public transportation emphasis and some fundamental differences than what you would see between it, like a Lyft and Uber service. With that said, we launched this pilot really because we wanted to improve transit ridership in general in the southern end of the county. We wanted to enhance customer service. As noted, as you've heard about a coverage-based solution, we really wanted to test this as a coverage-based model. And then we really wanted to provide those first and last mile connections to transit in general. And finally, there are opportunities to look how we can improve actually efficiencies within service as well with this. So we launched a 12-month pilot, which was launched in November of last year to test this as this microtransit service. We launched in partnership with the private sector with a company called VIA. VIA has several years experience in running microtransit solutions in partnerships with public transit agencies and cities actually all across the world. And I always like to note this, that VIA actually runs their nationwide call center out of Lehigh as well. We did geofence a 65 square mile service area, which is actually quite large for microtransit, which it encompasses the communities of Riverton, Bluffdale, Draper, South Jordan, and Harriman. And essentially what we've said, by using this on-demand mobile phone application, the customer then can make a request for a trip. And again, working within the service days and hours that we provide, they're eligible to move anywhere within the service area. And by doing that, we use smaller vehicles, again, that there's no bus stops whatsoever. So if I want to use the service, I essentially punch in the address that I want to be picked up and the address that I want to be dropped off at. Given that there's a public transit component to this, we actually require our customers to walk and meet the vehicle. It provides a level of operational efficiencies. And most importantly is that since this is based upon shared rides, there are other passengers in that vehicle. They don't have long detour times while you're picking up another customer. In addition to that, we provide wheelchair accessible vehicles, and that's something very fundamentally different. And I'll talk about it more. It's really a great opportunity to make sure we are servicing people with disabilities, providing them better transit solutions and lower cost solutions. And with that, it also allows us to kind of supplement paratransit service at a much lower cost. And so we see these operational efficiencies all around. And really, when you look at the way paratransit works, this is a better service for people who require a mobility accessible vehicle. And so talking about the success of the pilot, as I mentioned, we launched it last November prior to COVID. We saw some very early success for the pilot, which is really exciting. Some of those early metrics showed that we were averaging almost 400 weekday riders with the service. Literally the week before COVID hit and we saw the bottom fall out, we had reached a record high of 500 trips. We were prepared to keep watching the ridership grow until that happened. We saw that 30% of all our trips were shared rides. And again, when you think about removing single occupancy vehicles and really improving transportation, it's just about shared rides. And then, and most notably too, we did see about 50% of our trips connected to a transit station, as we talk about really making that first and last mile connection work. As COVID did hit, just like the rest of transit, we did see a pretty significant impact to the service. It hit a low, I guess, in April of just under 70 rides as that low. However, we've seen a pretty quick return to the service as we've continued to move on through COVID. About a 16% increase month after month. And now we see we're up into the mid 200s again, almost on a daily basis when it comes to ridership on the service. One of the great things about the microtransit service too is we were able to adjust this in real time. And so as demand increases or decreases, we can actually put more vehicles into service or schedule more operator hours. And so we're really able to control costs and watch those as service demand changes. And so it's a great learning point of this pilot is as we saw that ridership fall with COVID, that we were able to make real-time adjustments and find really a lot of operational efficiencies while still providing the same quality of service. I think one thing I forgot to mention too is you look at the public transit component, we don't pick you up door to door like you see with a Lyft or Uber type service. I did mention this, I apologize. We require you to walk to meet the vehicle. But what I didn't mention is if you do require a accessible vehicle, is we actually provide a promo code as if you call in, and we can provide that to where a senior or a person with a disability with that promo code, we can actually have the vehicle to provide a door-to-door service. And so again, we're really flexible in how we're able to provide that service. We also set other parameters with the service, such as the average pickup and wait time. So right now with the Southern Salt Lake County pilot, we've set on average a 15-minute wait time. And so once a person makes request for a vehicle, on average, that wait time should be 15 minutes or less until a vehicle picks them up. I don't think there's much better service outside of UVX when you think about how quick a vehicle picks you up. Outside maybe some routes in downtowns like city where you see like 15-minute service. So it's a really high quality service. And those parameters that, again, we were able to maintain as we actually adjusted for ridership changes during COVID. So finally, and let me just mention one more thing is microtransit, and maybe we can answer any questions you may have. As we've talked about service planning in our 5-year service plan, we continue to look at how microtransit can serve the community across the service area as a coverage-based model. And so we're actively looking at several areas within Utah County, within Salt Lake County, Weber, Davis counties, where we've identified these needs to where traditional fixed route services just don't quite work how we'd all like them to. And so from a coverage-based service, we see a potential to use microtransit. So as we continue to move forward with that service planning and those efforts, we will continue to look at microtransit in Utah County and the areas most notably, and this is still pretty high level, so it'll be hard to get into too many details, but looking at in the Lehigh area in general, and then in the West Provo area as well. And so with that, I know I just spoke a lot, but I probably should stop and see what questions everyone may have.
Yeah, thank you.
That's the end of, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure there is time for questions.
A quick question.
Yeah.
Jaron, do you see the long north drive up University Avenue is a good place for a microtransit system? These small ride share things.
So I'm going to probably defer to Laura, but but probably one thing I should know is that urban corridors such as Salt Lake City or downtown Provo are probably not good candidates for microtransit. It becomes a very costly service at that point because we're using smaller vehicles. They're not running on a fixed route network, and we tend to exceed ridership can exceed capacity, and so it's unlikely that in urban corridors you'd see a microtransit service outside of maybe potentially a late night or a weekend service. It just doesn't compete with good performing fixed route service. And Laura, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, you did a great job, Jaren. Yeah, we typically try to use it in areas that are typically lower ridership. There is, I'll give you a tip on our 5-year plan of something you might see. We are exploring the idea of a microtransit zone on kind of the western part of Provo, kind of between the airport and kind of the developed part of the city. So that's an area that we think has some potential, but obviously there's a lot more study and communication with you all before we implement something like that.
Cliff, were you asking about North University Avenue by the Riverwoods?
Yeah, I was thinking about multiple areas. You know, that's one. The State Street, maybe is it a State Street solution? Is it an airport solution? Those kinds of locations within Provo, because we have these arms that go out, but don't necessarily go through in a traditional ridership area. And then, you know, and going back to, you know, something you've talked about in the past, and that is, you know, when we talked with UDOT and that, it would be extremely expensive to build another bridge over the railway to try and join the southern part of State Street and cross over, you know, say into towards the mall, for example. Are there solutions like that that can be done, much like we use, I can't think what it's called, the flex buses up in Salt Lake County?
If I would like to add that one of the things that a new tool that we have that Laura's group is heading out on called Remix, and it can actually take a geographic area and it can tell us where people are going. And then we can start to really get specific about what kind of ridership we have in those areas. One of our 5-year plan goals is to shorten up the bus route that goes on south end of State Street, it's coming up from Springville and south of Springville. It's just too long of a route, and splitting those up so that there's shorter bus routes getting people into town from South State and to where they want to go. But I think it'd be really fun if you're interested as you make progress in your transit planning or transportation planning, is Laura can bring her tool in live time. She can show you in a geographic area where people are going and help us think through what's the best way to get them there.
Mr. Fillmore?
Thank you.
I'm afraid Cliff kind of stole my thunder. I was going to ask a similar question. We have two areas that seem to many of us to be underserved by BRT. We would love to see BRT run east on Orem Center Street down to the Riverwoods, and also use that perhaps in some kind of a loop that would facilitate BRT ridership on North University. We have a lot of new medium to high density development in that area. The Riverwoods area itself, the mall and everything surrounding it continues to expand. We'd like to make that a small hub perhaps for mass transit. The other area is South State Street. As we anticipate some things to enhance that area of the city, mass transit is a critical factor. We have hopes to improve the street itself, but also bring mass transit in there to assist many young families, many students. I'm just curious about your appetite for that and what we need to do to accelerate those kind of plans.
I could take a quick stab at that, and then Mary and Jaren, feel free to jump in. We'd be more than happy to sit down and explore all kinds of ideas with you. Sometimes there are things that we've never thought about that would work great, and sometimes there are ideas that seem great, and then you draw it and you try it and you actually test it, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe that's not the best idea, or oh my gosh, that's going to cost $2 million. We'd be more than happy to sit down with your staff and work through a number of scenarios and just be an additional resource as you're going through this planning exercise. So.
Okay, well, plan on it. Okay.
We've had yes, we will, and I've had some really great conversations with Bill Pepperoni talking about where some of the growth is happening and where some of the density intensity is happening, where we need to be looking at transit. And so we've been folding that into our conversations, but we really want to do it jointly, like Laura said. And I'd love for you to see this tool. maybe at a future work session or something where we can show you, you pick the area and we can show you where people are going, and then we can see how does that make sense or doesn't make sense with transit.
Great, thank you. Mr. Harding.
Thank you. So I have not thought this all the way through. You know, I'm just kind of throwing it out there a little bit like Laura mentioned earlier. You know, sometimes these ideas sound great until you take a look at them a little bit closer. But it's been a while, but I don't think it's changed much. I don't think I'll even remember the terms exactly, but if you look at the total cost to provide a ride to someone using a bus service, the fare box covered, I think it was 17% of the cost, and just general taxes, sales taxes covered the other 83%. And so the thought is if the taxpayer is already covering, 83% or whatever that number is, I wonder if we would be getting better value as a community if we just covered that last 17%. Earlier, Mary asked us, do we want to emphasize coverage, or do we want to emphasize ridership, I think was the question. And I actually think we could do, or at least the areas where we look at it as a coverage question, we could actually make it a ridership question if we reduced, or if we covered that last 17%. I think it makes it much more efficient. You don't have to have exact change. You don't have to wait for people to do that payment. The whole payment system, I mean, that must be a fairly significant amount of the cost of providing that ride is doing the whole dealing with payments and whatnot, and it slows the whole system down, and it's a convenience thing. If I just think that if we had free fare zones or whatever, some of these areas that aren't served at all, because it would be just a kind of a coverage thing, we could actually get the numbers to make it a rider, shift that over to the ridership, and we could get much better coverage, much more areas, and we could get much more value for the money that we're investing in public transit.
It's even less than 17%. It's more like 13 to 15% is the fare box. It is a big number when you look across our system. I think it's like $52 million, but it is significant how much it costs us to pay to collect that money and to have the ticket vending machines and so on and so forth. So this is a big philosophical question, policy question for the UTA trustees. Kent Millington is just leaving office, and Mayor Jeff Acerson will be our new trustee for Utah County. So it'd be really good to have those conversations with him. And certainly UVX has been a pilot about proving out is that work. And you're right on the money about that. In that free fare has certainly been a big boost. Not only does it make the system go faster because you don't have that collection issue, but we see what it's done to ridership. So the ridership before, when we were collecting fare, was about 2,000 boardings a day on the regular bus. Of course, much faster, much more frequent. But we also went to 12,000 boardings, in a tune. I'm singing your song. You know this story. So it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And there are places where they are experimenting with free fare for their entire system. I believe Kansas City is one of them. Logan does free fare for their bus system. So it's something to think about.
Thank you.
Well, we appreciate very much all of this information and for your time with us this evening. It is evening now, but thank you so much. We're going to take a break now, and we will reconvene in 10 minutes. So we'll just call it at 6:15. So if you want to just mute yourselves and turn off your video, and then we'll just start back up at 6:15. to item number 4 on our agenda, which is a presentation from the Mountainland Association of Governments to discuss regional transportation demands and how they impact Provo over the next 20 to 30 years. And this will be presented by, I don't know if it's Andrew Jackson or Sean Seeger. Sean, thank you for being with us.
You bet. Thank you, Council. Sure appreciate this really fun opportunity to relook at your general plan. You don't get this opportunity, as you guys know, very often. If I remember right, the consultant was saying 1990 was the last relook at the general plan. So this is a big deal, and it's really an opportunity to re-envision Provo City, much the way that Orem City did a couple years ago in Orem's creation of a bunch of mixed-use nodes on State Street, of all places. Who would ever think that we would have such amazing development taking place in Orem, and much of it due to their rezoning and reimagining, revisualizing their State Street corridor. So this is a great opportunity to pause and look up and think aspirationally and re-envision what the context of Provo is, where Provo is right now. Provo in Utah Valley, Provo in the state of Utah, and Provo in the Intermountain West, and the dynamics that are taking place within the Intermountain West and the demographic changes. We have a video. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not. And Chair, you can advise me whether or not you want to play this video. I sent the link to Hannah and John earlier. It's done by the Gardner Policy Institute. And two of the people that we really look up to, Natalie Gochner and Pam Perlick, are just amazing, inspirational leaders that we get to work with on a monthly basis and do a lot of demographic projection work with. And looks like we have the video framed up there. I'd like to just play this. This is about, I think it's 13 minutes long, if that's appropriate to do, Chair. And then we'll follow up with a couple slides.
That's fine.
Thank you. Let me see if I can.
President Theodore Roosevelt once said, "We have fallen heirs to the most glorious heritage a people ever received, and each one must do his part if we wish to show that the nation is worthy of its good fortune." Here in Utah, that glorious heritage is on full display. From the red rock cliffs of the south to the snow-capped mountains in the north, our state's natural splendor captivates the imagination of all who lay eyes on it. Of course, it's more than the land that drives Utah's good fortune. The people of this great state are hard at work, building up our communities and creating a prosperous future. The economy is growing, unemployment is low, and a high quality of life brings new people and investment from around the world. As we look ahead, what challenges will our state face? What will it look like in 10 years, 50 years? How do we prepare for the Utah of the future and continue to grow and prosper? One thing is certain: Utah is changing, and the work must begin now to pass this glorious heritage to our posterity. At the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah, we prepare economic, demographic, and public policy research that helps Utah prosper. The Gardner Policy Institute in the David Eccles School of Business is responsible for preparing the state's long-term demographic and economic projections. These projections make one thing clear: Utah will remain a place of growth and change for the foreseeable future. In a mere half-century, the state will be home to nearly 6 million people, or the size of the Philadelphia metro area today. The state will add approximately 57,000 new residents each year. That's like adding a city the size of Taylorsville again and again and again for 50 consecutive years.
People here in Utah need to recognize that we're really in a region of growth. 2016, we were the fastest growing state population-wise, and we've had a very rapidly growing economy too. And for the foreseeable future, growth really will remain a major dynamic here.
Approximately 1/3 of Utah's growth will come from new people moving into our state. Many of these people will look different, talk different, and think different. Utah will diversify and change.
The growth that's occurring in Utah is accompanied also by change. So we're not talking about the same old Utah just being supersized. And one of the changes that is occurring is the fact that the youth are much more multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic than the adults. What people need to understand is that this shift, the increasing diversity of our youth, outnumbering the more homogenous elders, it's ongoing. And it's cumulative, and it's irreversible, and it has very significant impact. It's a new Utah that's emerging.
Not only is Utah growing, our state and its people are changing. The most significant change will be our aging population. Right now, 1 in 10 Utahns are over the age of 65. By 2065, it will be 1 in 5.
When I think of modern medicine and what it means to our life expectancy, we're all living longer, and that means we're getting older and older. And we have this large cohort, the baby boom generation. We'll have thousands of Utahns who are over 100 years of age. That changes everything. It changes housing choices, transportation preferences, and we're going to put a lot more of our wealth into healthcare.
Demographers estimate the number of centenarians, or Utahns age 100 and older, will increase from approximately 340 today to 6,800 by 2065. Of course, our aging population isn't the only significant change occurring. Utah's economy is transitioning from goods-producing industries to service and knowledge industries.
In 1980, over half of all private sector jobs in our state were in goods producing sectors. Now, knowledge and service-based jobs outnumber those goods-based jobs 3-1. With knowledge industries like high tech and life sciences gaining more and more momentum, I believe that Utah's economy is poised to become one of the nation's premier knowledge economies. That is, as long as we can continue to supply the skilled workforce that those industries demand.
The changing face and growing population of Utah will also have an impact on where Utahns live and work. Over the next 50 years, the greater Salt Lake area will continue to emerge as a global metropolitan center. The Ogden, Salt Lake, and Provo-Orem metropolitan areas will merge to create a megalopolis of 3.3 million residents, or the current size of the Seattle-Tacoma-Bellevue, Washington metropolitan area. Utah will maintain its role as the crossroads of the West. International trade will continue to blossom as Utah's export economy grows. Today, Utah exports well over $12 billion in merchandise. That number will increase dramatically as Utah becomes increasingly integrated with the global economy. Downtown Salt Lake City will continue to rise and be the center of commerce, transportation, banking, legal services, entertainment, and culture.
In a lot of ways, downtown really is the beating heart for the whole state. It's the center for finance, it's the center for government, it's where everything sort of happens, where a lot of things are generated and things often radiate out from the urban center. So when we think about what downtown might look like in 10 years or 50 years, I think we'll see a lot more tall buildings. I think we'll see over the next 5 years, probably another dozen tall buildings get built in downtown.
The point of the mountain and northwest quadrant of Salt Lake County will swell and become significant economic engines for the state.
The term Silicon Slopes is often applied to this tech phenomenon in Utah, but it's really important to note that it's not just the tech industry that benefits from this phenomenon, and it's not even one particular city or location along the Wasatch Front. It really is the entire Wasatch Front. And the technology companies are doing things that drive benefit in many other parts of our community. The jobs that are created to support the technical infrastructure that's used by companies in so many other industries This is more than just a bunch of tech companies locating in Utah. Silicon Slopes is truly cross-industry, size of company. It's a fantastic part of our growth story.
The Northwest Quadrant of Salt Lake City is a commerce center, a tremendous commerce center with tremendous potential. That potential will come in two ways. Number one, the jobs that are created. It can become an employment center with diverse employment through the employment stack. The other part that can happen is a tremendous tax generator. So as we see the displacement in retail of a tax base, much of that's going to go to fulfillment. So the Northwest Quadrant of Salt Lake City has tremendous potential to be an enormous commerce center.
Nowhere will the effects of urbanization be felt more than in Utah County, which is projected to grow by approximately 1 million new residents over the next 50 years. As the epicenter for urban growth, Utah County's population will nearly reach the size of Salt Lake County by 2065.
We're going to see political power, economic power, population power shifting south as Utah County swells by more than 1 million more residents. That means that the county is going to have a lot of opportunity, but it's also going to have incredible challenges. And I would count among them increased congestion, air quality challenges, housing affordability, and importantly, critical land conservation. There's a lot of prime agricultural lands in Utah County. They're going to be at risk.
The ring counties, those counties that surround the primary urban counties, will also attract increased development. Moving south, Utah's Dixie is projected to be the fastest growing region in the state and will more than triple in size over the next 50 years, so long as the state develops the necessary water supplies.
Now, we project Washington County to be the most rapidly growing county in the entire state, tripling in population to surpass 500,000 people. Now, if you begin to think about what it will take to support that kind of a population and all those households, those are tremendous infrastructure challenges. Those are tremendous challenges in all kinds of land use planning and zoning. Water really looms large there, too.
While Utah receives high praise for rapid job growth, low unemployment, and upward mobility, parts of our state still suffer from a lack of economic opportunity. This will be most prevalent in rural counties that lack economic diversification. Parts of rural Utah will continue to struggle and experience economic decline as its narrow, specialized economic base is exposed to the forces of globalization and the highly cyclical natural resource industries. Utah's coal industry will continue to struggle. Agriculture will continue to be an economic mainstay, but will not provide sufficient economic opportunity to create a vibrant and prosperous economy.
This story of a tale of two Utahs has emerged, where economic growth in our state's urban areas has caused our state economy to rank among the very best economies in the nation. All while there are many rural economies in our state that are actually experiencing decline. Policies that can alleviate this trend include encouraging greater economic diversity, and then also cultivating and leveraging existing comparative advantage in rural agriculture, energy, manufacturing, and tourism markets.
Utah's booming travel and tourist industry will continue to be a source of economic growth in many rural counties. Future development, including new ski resorts, state, or even national parks, will bring even more visitors who will come and experience Utah's natural beauty. With that growth, however, comes increased importance of public lands management and possible future controversy.
I don't see the public land debates getting any easier. We're going to see more national monuments proposed in this state, and it's going to create more and more lively discussions, and we're going to need public leadership.
Northern Utah will continue to urbanize as growth pressures push deeper into northern Weber County, Box Elder County, and Cache County. Hill Air Force Base, Utah State University, agriculture, and manufacturing will be the major sources of economic growth in Utah's North Country. These economic assets will need to be cultivated if this region is to continue on a moderate growth path. Utah is facing changes that are ongoing, irreversible, cumulative, and consequential. This is the new Utah. We are becoming more urban, which will impact transportation congestion, air quality, housing affordability, public safety, and other challenges faced by urban societies. Technological advancements will both help and cause new challenges, requiring us to bolster our knowledge economy through education. Critical lands, such as prime agricultural, recreational, and environmentally sensitive lands, will come under intensifying pressure from population growth and economic development, especially in Utah County. Housing will become more expensive, and Utah taxpayers will be called to invest in new roads and transit, water infrastructure, and educational assets. New diversity in demographics, culture, language, socioeconomics, and generations create the necessity to reinvent and reimagine how we design and connect our communities. It's not our grandmother's Utah anymore. But we live in a prosperous state and a time of abundance. We have wise community leaders and citizens who are capable of guiding the future direction of our state. Our economic, cultural, technological, and demographic capacity has never been greater.
We're living in times of tremendous growth and change. The dynamic for change will only become more intensified as time goes on. What we need to recognize is that our actions today will shape the future that we have tomorrow. The future is not given. We are active participants in, not just witnesses to, the great changes that are going on. And the actions we take today very purposefully will impact the future.
We frequently say past is prologue. I like to look back to 1847, when the Mormon pioneers settled Salt Lake Valley. Parley P. Pratt was in the Advanced Scouting Company, and he wrote this in his journal. We could not refrain from a shout of joy, which almost involuntarily escaped from our lips the moment this grand and lovely scenery was within our view. Looking forward, I feel this same sense of optimism. We live in an extraordinary state, and we absolutely have the power to create the future we want for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren.
The new Utah will require us to guide change if we are to preserve what we value. Community leadership, infrastructure investment, planning, tax modernization, and social cohesion will be more important than ever before. Decision makers have the opportunity and power to guide this growth through thoughtful planning, careful investment, and wise public policies. We will do what is difficult. We will succeed for our posterity. A new day is dawning in Utah.
Thank you for watching that with me real briefly. That was really fun for me to watch, even though I've seen it several times. And you guys are the policymakers. You will be setting the stage for growth in Utah County. And the thing that Pam and Natalie kept saying over and over again was growth and change, and you're active participants in that change that's going to take place. You're not just spectators. What you guys are going to do with this general plan document is going to set this tone for the next 20 to 30 years as we look back from the last time we did this. I think about the knowledge economy that Natalie was talking about, with Qualtrics being sold to the German SAP company. I think it was a year ago or so, 2 years ago, for $8 billion. Now, the state of Utah's budget is $20 billion. So this private company that was held in Provo was sold for $8 billion. It's an amazing opportunity that we have right now to re-envision Provo, and the stuff that's going on around Provo is nothing but supportive of your continued growth. I'm going to tick off just a couple big projects, and then my associate Sean Elliott is going to show you a couple more detailed slides. The Frontrunner South project that Laura talked about. This is a huge effort to look at extending Frontrunner into Springville, Spanish Fork, down into Payson. That area is expected to grow from 100,000 population today to over 400,000 population in the year 2050. So you're adding 300,000 people coming into Provo potentially. It's just, the growth is going to be astounding. Great opportunity, but could be threatening as well, as we know. The Utah Valley Express bus system that we just talked about, and replicating that on State Street, the Central Corridor Transit Study, investing in that, the I-50 or the Point of the Mountain light rail study that's being completed right now that would extend the Draper light rail line into Utah County. Double tracking Front Runner and electrifying it. Right now, we cannot get to 15-minute headways because we don't have enough double track in place, but we're starting to build double track. We're looking at how to electrify that. If we could get that into 15-minute headways, that would be a game changer for everyone. The thing that Carlos Braceras likes to say all the time is that he's the director of UDOT, is we lead in support of the communities building the community of their dreams. So UDOT is not the old UDOT that they used to be, where they would impose their will upon the local governments. UDOT is there to help you build the projects that you guys want to build. And this is a sea change in government policy, basically, from the biggest organization that influences construction in the state of Utah, UDOT. And we have some great opportunities to continue to make some amazing progress with even things like a bridge over Utah Lake, opportunities to bring people from Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs into Provo and Orem area, continuing Provo's dominance as the center of commerce, healthcare, and education. So Sean, do you want to show us a couple of detailed slides on some of the demographic and growth that we're seeing in Provo and Orem area, or whatever it is that you wanted to bring up with the group?
Sure. So I emailed over a PDF that can be put up. Thank you. Okay. Again, my name is Sean Elliott with Mountainland, and I'm over the creation of our Transplan 50, which is our regional transportation plan for the urbanized area. Every 4 years we update this plan, so we're able to keep up with growth trends and other emerging type trends and technologies and so forth as we develop the plan. Next slide.
Sean, I'm going to give you control of my screen. Give me just 1 sec. When you see a message, when you see my mouse circle around on the screen, just click to accept, and you can scroll through. Okay.
Okay, great.
You should be able to click anywhere.
While we're waiting, is it possible to share a copy of that video with us?
Yeah. Sean, did you send a copy of the link to that video already?
I'll drop that into the chat box. Thank you, guys.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the growth. The video does a very good job at talking about what's going to happen along the Wasatch Front. This slide that's before you is talking about the 4 urban counties of the Wasatch Front. And as you can see in the darker colors, that's the population of today. And actually it's 2017. So the 624,000 in Utah County is actually around 650,000 now. But we're projected by 2050 to go to 1.3 million. And as you can see, the other 3 counties, Salt Lake County growing at 36%, Weber at 42. Their growth does not equal the growth, all 3 of them together does not equal the growth that we will see in Utah County. So the growth is definitely south of downtown Salt Lake, not north. This next slide just breaks it down into Utah County by quadrant. And so the blue area is out Lehigh westward to Eagle Mountain, 239% growth. There are about 130,000 people today. They'll be at 430 by 2050. The South County is the other area that's going to add a lot of people. There's a lot of land in the South County. Provo and Orem, central area, add about 100,000 people in that next 30 years. A lot of that is in Vineyard, but also in downtown Provo and in the other areas south and west of Provo that still have some area to grow. Orem, on the other hand, is pretty much built out. They are going to densify along the State Street corridor. We also accredit the land use or the the growth potential in downtown Provo. There is a lot of high density built into these growth figures for the Provo area because of that. This next slide is another way to look at that growth. I didn't label it, but the map on the left is today's densities. The darker the color, the more dense. And then the map on the right is the 2050. The one thing I want you to see out of that is Provo and Orem still are the main destination, the center of the valley when it comes to population, and then also with the economy. The economy along the I-15 corridor does grow up into Lehigh and to the north, and the densities along that corridor for population, which is what this map is showing, grow up to the north and out into Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs. And the South County fills in. When Eric with UDOT talked about those pinch points or choke points, that portion between Provo and Springville, the Provo Bay, in 2050 is our #1 congested place in the county. And most of that is because we have such limited options of what kind of transportation facilities we can put through there. This next slide is talking about the goals of our long-range plan. The first goal, update the regional highway system to a metropolitan grid-based network. Utah County does not have very good highway connectivity when it comes to the different sizes of roads, the types of roads, the spacing of roads. Salt Lake County pretty much tried to build a dream grid of connecting between their communities. Our communities grew from each city individually and didn't do well connecting. We also have a big lake in the middle of our county, which makes it difficult to create this grid. Mountainland is just starting an urban grid study where we're putting together a toolkit for the cities to use to try to implement making these connections between their communities and through their communities. An example, again, as we talked about Springville and Provo, we have I-15 and we have State Street. There are a few other options that can happen and that we have identified in the plan and in this grid network that we've started. And we want to work with Provo and with Springville and with the other cities too to see if some of these can get implemented to better space out traffic and then also to better facilitate transit, because the more connectivity we have of our roads, the more we can also use those to move around buses and so forth. Our goal #2 is to explore additional freeways and add capacity. You can't put everything on I-15. A proper grid system has freeways about every 5 miles. And so, looking at I-15 and then the Mountain View corridor coming down through the north part of the county, a lot of talk about a bridge over Utah Lake. That helps tremendously when it comes to spreading out our more regional high-speed trips and our economy. And so if a bridge can be built, we think it can, but future study will have to tell us that for sure. But at least modeling wise, it works. And so by connecting that into the Provo-Orem area, what you're doing is you're bringing those Western communities into Provo and Orem to go to school at the 60,000 plus universities and into your business centers and so forth. Goal #3, create a robust regional transit system. Again, when you're going to have 1.3 million people, and a lot of that's becoming more of an urban environment, transit's going to work better. And so the plan supports the bus rapid transit system, the light rail system, the commuter rail system. All of those are looked at in the plan into the future. And then build a regionally connected active transportation system. Jim's going to talk about a lot of that in a minute, but Utah County, we shine when it comes to our regional trails. And our elected officials have supported us over the years of creating this regional system that I would dare say is the envy of the Wasatch Front. And then goal #5 is preserve what we have, which obviously we want to keep up. UDOT does an excellent job at keeping our roads up. And so we continue that in our goals of the plan. This map here is transit. And I hope you can see it. I don't know if it's too small, but, and again, the Transplant 50 is available on our website. at mountainland.org if you want to peruse it. But what I wanted to just show here is that through the Provo and Orem area, the red line along State Street, that is the BRT that is currently being studied with the Central Corridor study. And other things that we show on there is potential light rail in the future coming down from Salt Lake through Provo and down to Spanish Fork. Again, we show they work with the densities that we have in the future. It comes down to funding and if we want to have that kind of facility. You know, BRT is working really well for us. And so if it works well in the future, then that should be the route we go. And so as we talk through these and as we plan in the future, I think we're going to take an even bigger look at what those facilities do. And then the last map I have here is on the highway system. And again, two things I'll point out on here is the bridge over Utah Lake. If it is going to connect into Provo and Orem, right now we identify it just on the Provo-Orem border. You know, but again, future study will determine if that is the right place to go. But again, our hope is that the local plans can also help guide this so that we don't have to tear out a bunch of things later. So, and then also the I-15 corridor. We show in the 2030 period, 2030, 2040, that it's at failure. Again, we've got all of our ducks in one basket. And so do we do things to improve I-15 with frontage road systems or so forth? Or do we build a parallel facility similar to the Legacy Highway up in the Davis County area? That's shown here with that darker blue line crossing over Provo Bay. Again, they're in the plan, but future study, and they are identified in the plan, that future study will determine if these get built and then where they'll get built. And as we do that, of course, we will be partnering with the cities to get your input and your buy-in on these things. So with that, I don't have anything else to present unless you have any questions.
Thank you, Sean. I just wanted to finish up real briefly by describing what UDOT often says, that we have 80% of the population lives in an urban area in Utah. So it's kind of counterintuitive. You don't think about Utah as being an urban state, but where we live, most of us live within an urban area, and 85% of the state lives along the Wasatch Front. So it's a very lineal corridor, as we all know, from Brigham City to Santaquin. That can be a good thing, but then it can also present some challenges, as Sean pointed out, in some of these pinch points. And so great opportunities. And if we can open up for questions, we're happy to take those, or you can move on to Jim Price, our associate, as well, whatever we can do.
Yeah, we're out of time on this item, but I do have two hands up from Mr. Harding and Ms. Ellsworth. So if they could make it quick on this. Go ahead, Mr. Harding.
Thank you. Yeah, I will make this quick. With the images you have up here, we show that that bridge across the lake. My preference would be that it would come to Provo, that it would come in right by the airport. I think that's kind of a central location, and they could continue up to the intermodal hub. You know, as far as connectivity. But my biggest thought on this is, I would love to see that bridge carrying rail, not asphalt. Meaning bringing in people on, you know, light rail or you know, even commuter rail, depending on what the numbers are. You know, we would love to have the people come in, but not necessarily, you know, adding to the congestion of the roads. And so by making that rail and having the bridge across that makes it far more convenient than driving around, but then really gives us the opportunity, you know, to connect them through that intermodal hub, to use the even microtransit as was discussed. And it seems if we're making that kind of investment, that to create a convenience that isn't there now, it makes a lot more sense to invest in transit. We're bringing them, like you say, it's to bring them into the schools, it's to bring them into the jobs, it's to bring. These are all kind of those large centers where transit makes a lot of sense, rather than bringing in, thousands of single occupant vehicles to congest the roads.
Yes, right now we're doing what's called the North Lakeshore Study, and part of that is looking at rail options, and one of those is a rail option crossing the lake into Provo. So we are looking at it. Right now, transit carries about 2% of our trips in the state, in the Wasatch Front region. And so part of that is also our development patterns. And so we're looking at ways to say, if we densify in certain centers and so forth, can we make that work? And then to see if that's something that other cities want to do.
Ms. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I'm curious about the pinch point that you talked about between Springville and Provo. Do you have any more data or information on that?
So basically, when you've got, let me pull up the number here again. When you've got 400,000 people in the South County, 300,000 in the Central, it's those trips. The other is the South County plans are not as urban, and so they're more of a suburban type setting. So a lot of those that population does have to go north and come into Provo and Orem and northward. So and so the choke point is, I don't have it in front of me right now, but the long range plan does talk about the choke points. It's just the fact that there's only basically two main corridors coming into that area. By building a parallel facility along I-15, we can carry another 100,000 trips a day. So the current I-15 carries about 130,000 through that area. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at to see if we can move more people. Commuter rail right now carries about 10 to 12,000 trips a day in Utah County. So those are the kind of things that we can balance. But again, the types of, if you're in a suburban environment in the South County, you're going to have to look at highway options too.
So we should expect a lot more traffic, a lot more trips on State Street between Provo and Springville?
In 2050, there are, yes, unless we can get other options.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item. I do want to make note of the fact that I will be 100 years old in 2065. So hopefully I'll be one of those 6,800 people who are still sticking around.
You and me both, brother.
What's that?
You and me both.
Okay, good. All right, so we've got time now for our last item, presentation again by Mountainland Association of Governments to discuss active transportation trends and how it can be better encouraged. And this will be presented by Jim Price. Thanks for being with us. See, I think you're on mute, Mr. Price. Sorry. Still can't hear you.
I had to find my picture, so I got to unmute myself.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. A lot of what I'm going to talk about has already been mentioned by my compatriots and by UDOT and UTA, and this is active transportation and how it applies to Provo and how it applies to all of Utah County going into the future. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is that we got a taste of what the demands for active transportation are going to be in 2050 when we reach 1.5 million people in this county. In April and May, when we were in the midst of the earliest part of the pandemic, and people didn't have the gyms and they didn't have travel places to go, we saw 150 to 175% increase in trail and other area usage within those months. And that would be the equivalent of what we would see when that kind of growth occurs. And we strained the system. We've never done that before. We really strained our active transportation system. But what I want to kind of focus on a little bit about tonight is, how do I, forgive me, How do I go forward? There we go. Some of the active transportation achievements and challenges, I'm just going to briefly, I know that we're very short on time, but I want to hit some of the achievements that Provo has accomplished and is accomplishing right now. One of those, the big one, is Bulldog Boulevard. If you have not yet had the chance to either ride your bike or just walk on Bulldog Boulevard, when that was just opened, first time it opened, I went down and I walked around the entire route, and I felt as a pedestrian as if I belonged there. It was an amazing change from the original Bulldog, now Cougar Boulevard. I apologize for the historic naming. And that was because I felt like I wasn't right next to traffic. I wasn't right next to cars. I didn't feel intimidated being there. And that is going to be the theme of what we talk about as far as active transportation. Active transportation, meaning walking and biking, scooters, those kinds of things. The biggest barriers to use are psychological. And the biggest psychological barriers are if you don't feel safe, if you have to be right next to traffic, if you have to be right next to cars that are zooming by or cutting you off. It is a huge barrier to getting out and being more active. And this is where Cougar Boulevard has made a gigantic change in this entryway into BYU and into Provo. Again, if you have not been down there, I hope that all of you have. If not, please go down and please experience it. It's an amazing change. Of course, we have the Provo River Parkway Trail, and what I'm bringing up here is that we see annual trips on the Provo River Parkway Trail of about 300,000. We have automatic counters out. What we saw this year, the 175% increase, is if would be more in the neighborhood of 420,000 if it carried on all year long. We don't see it happening this year, but just to kind of give you a taste of that. The College Connector Trail, about 8,000 trips. The buffered bike lanes, and this is kind of an interesting thing. That was a surprise to me and to when UDOT put this in back in 2017. If you look at the bike lane here, and you see the cyclist here, this is the bike lane, and this is a 3-foot painted buffer. That's all that is. What that does is that gives cyclists much more comfort in being in that bike lane and using that road as part of the transportation trip. It no longer just applies or just attracts the most brave, if you will, of cyclists. It starts attracting a lot wider population. We have counters in the pavement there on the north end, and we counted 21,000 trips in 2019 through those bike lanes. And the counters are very good at rejecting vehicles. So we're pretty sure that that's the minimum number of bicyclists that we saw through those bike lanes in that time. One of the other things that Provo has done very well, and in conjunction with UDOT, had put in these bicycle intersections. The first one on 3rd South and 2nd East, and that I had a video of, and I'm sorry that show how that worked, and I'm sorry that didn't work out, so we substituted a photo. But there are 2 others being built right now on 3rd South. Those allow cyclists to ride from the quiet neighborhood streets and get a light and ride across that very, very busy 3rd South and continue on their way without feeling like they have to wait for traffic, a gap in traffic that never comes. This is, again, one of those barriers, a psychological barrier to good use of active transportation. And these are the types of things that we put in that reduce those psychological barriers. Mary DeLamar Schaefer talked about the integration of active transportation with UVX and with transit. And we believe very much that that is the case, that active transportation makes transit work, and transit makes active transportation work. The reason being is that if you're on a bike, or if you're walking, or you're on a skateboard, or you're on a scooter, you can get on UVX and you can go from Provo to Orem. And it makes your walking or your biking trip quite short and quite convenient. And that's what makes active transportation as a transportation mode work very well, as its integration, tight integration with transit. Oops, I'm just thought I would zoom in there for a second. Let me go to the next one. And of course, scooter share that came in not long ago, and how successful and how terrific that's been is another part of that, what we call microtransit. And the reason that we include scooters in active transportation is they use the same facilities. They use the trails, they use the sidewalks, they use the bike lanes. And we have to plan for those new modes as they become more popular and more available. And then this is one of the things that we're working on currently with UTA and with Provo City and with MAG and with UDOT is bridging the tracks between the Intermodal Center and 600 South. This is a concept that's not going to be quite this long when it's finally built, but it is in design now. And when that's built in the next couple of years, it'll provide bicycle and pedestrian direct access to the Intermodal Center. And people will not have to walk across those 5 sets of tracks or crawl in and under boxcars when they're stopped, the UP boxcars when they're stopped across 2nd West. Now, what are the challenges coming up? Of course, the challenges, again, as we've been talking about, are the increasing diversity of our population, the increasing size of our population, and we'll need to create a robust interconnected system. That is one of the things that we have been doing for the last 20 years, and we have been working very hard on that. Countywide, Provo has been working very hard on that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. We also want to appeal to a wider market of potential users. We don't just want the, as we call them, kind of the spandex crowd. There's nothing wrong with spandex if you wear it, but we want to appeal beyond that very small percentage of cyclists and people who would otherwise be very comfortable to get out on a trail or out on a protected bike lane, like is on Bulldog Boulevard. Just as an aside, one of the first days after Bulldog or Cougar, I'll change that one of these days. I'm sorry, Mayor. After Cougar Boulevard was opened, I saw a mix of bikers, walkers, scooters, and electric wheelchair users in that protected bike lane. What a huge difference. What a huge difference in the ability of people to get around without a car along Cougar Boulevard. And then number 3 is we don't want to break the bank. Transportation is expensive. Cougar Boulevard was a large investment. We can't do that everywhere. We'd like to be able to do it everywhere. And I think that we can do it in more places, and that's a great example of what we can do. But of course, we can't do it everywhere that we need to. So we'll come up with some examples of some things that we can do that create more comfortable biking and walking for other people as we go. So here are the challenges. This is a map of Provo and a little bit of Orem. This is what's currently on the ground as far as active transportation facilities. Red are the trails, blue are the bike lanes, those type of facilities. And you can see that we do have a good system, and it's a pretty connected system. But what you also see are huge gaps in getting around town. And closing those gaps and making those connected systems, just like we make a connected street network, is the challenge. If we can make those connections, if people can get where they want to go in a safe, comfortable, robust system, more people will walk and bike and use transit. And this is a study that has been done in the Portland State University that showed that on the very right in the blue, those are when I talk about the spandex crowd, those are the people, 4 to 7% of experienced cyclists, they'll ride in traffic. They don't care. They'll go where they're going to go. They don't care if there's a bike lane. Bike lane is nice. All they care about is they've got room on the road. Maybe 9% are somewhat concerned. They prefer a bike lane. They prefer a buffered bike lane. But the other 51 to 56% of people who would or could use a bike in these surveys don't want to be next to traffic. They don't want to be feeling like they're unsafe. They need facilities like the Provo River Trail and like Cougar Boulevard to entice them to do something besides drive a car. And that's the challenge that we always have to address as we're looking at active transportation, are the psychological barriers that we don't have to really think about when we talk about driving. We talk about sometimes the bus is that way, but when we talk about roads and driving, that's the thing that we don't need to worry about, but that we have to worry about and we have to be aware of whenever we're doing things in active transportation. If we want to give people more choices, we have to give them choices that they feel safe and that they feel are convenient. Now, when we talk about don't break the bank, and here's again another shot of Cougar Boulevard, there are some other things that we can do in some areas, and that are being done in Provo, and that are being done around the county. And some of those things are like this. This is called a cycle track. This is not in Provo. This is actually back east, but it's a great example of actually what Lehigh is working on right now. It's their 700 South cycle track. And what they're doing is they're essentially using the excess pavement of the roadway and turning that into a two-way cycle track and using cars, parked cars, as barriers. They've got the bollards up and they've got the paint up, but the parked cars create the actual physical barrier from traffic. And that makes it so much more safe and so much more comfortable to use. There are some other things that can be done. These are wave barriers. These they can be temporary or they can be permanent. They can just be put on the line. They essentially define what the bike lane is from the car lane, and it says to the cyclist, "This is my space, and you can't come in here." Same thing. This is something that was sent to me by Aaron Scabland, who has been with Bike Provo for a long time. And this is something that they worked on for a while to get a kind of a semi-protected bike lane. This was a cheap experiment. And these are some of the things that can be done to make active transportation, to make cycling especially, more convenient on more roads for more people. And then we talk about this. This is our 10-year, actually our 20-year bicycle plan, bike ped plan for all of Utah County. This is part of the Trans Plan 50. And we've been working on these facilities with all the communities within Utah County for a long time, including Provo. And your partners, MAG, UDOT, and UTA, can and have been helping the city and the cities in the rest of the county to create a system that is interconnected, that is robust, that is comfortable. We're not where we want to be yet, but we're well on our way to getting there. And we plan to continue to working on that over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Price. I have a quick question. First of all, just a couple of comments. I'm a commuter by bike, and I have very much enjoyed Cougar Boulevard. I've really enjoyed Second East as well. I find one of the things, it's not only safer than it was, but it's more convenient. That light crossing 7th North is incredibly fast. I mean, it almost seems like I'm never waiting for the light to turn green more than 10 seconds. It's really terrific. So I hope that that sort of development becomes what was envisioned, and that more and more students and residents in the area will use it. One thing I've noticed, and I just wondered if you knew anything about this, but as a bike commuter, when I use Google Maps and I select for transportation by bike, it tends to, I guess it's designed to find the safer routes, right? It's going to pick streets that have the bike lanes and so on. And I don't know how many people are aware of how convenient that is. And I'm wondering how you go about helping people understand how effective that can be. I mean, I actually find the same is true also, by the way, with mass transit. I mean, if you select mass transit, it's an incredibly helpful app to use. But I think in addition to safety issues for the percentage of people who are probably likely to bike more if they knew that it was safer, there's probably that same group who would bike more if they knew it was more convenient, and don't realize that both the convenience and the safety are enhanced by choosing routes that follow those pathways. And I'm assuming that somebody is updating the apps, right? I mean, there's somehow that information is getting to them so that it's embedded in there, so that when I need to do an errand up in Orem, I can find all the best ways to go there. Is that true?
It is true, but that is up to Google, and we're not exactly sure how often they update that data. We keep data on all of the active transportation facilities within Utah County that we're aware of, and we're aware of most all of them. And our data is publicly available, publicly accessible. I don't know if that's where Google gets their data or not, but Google for a long time had a real problem with their algorithms and choosing those routes. But those algorithms have been getting, like you're saying, Mr. Chair, those algorithms have been getting a lot better. And they can actually choose routes that are safer and more comfortable and more convenient. So that is something that is getting better and better, and that the private sector really contributes to that. The public sector essentially contributes the data that says this is where you can go. This is where people, this is also, I don't know if they have access to, say, Strava data or streetlight data. Those are also big data sources that indicate where people are going already on their bikes or walking where they choose to go. And they can integrate that into their algorithm, as far as I understand it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would just also add, I mean, you mentioned our bike walk people. They're really a tremendous asset to the city because they have a really localized, organic sense of the streets and the routes and so on. So in addition to the technology of an app like Google Maps, they're sort of the local lore, as it were, that they've developed and continue to develop and share with us really helps us to develop a plan for the city that hopefully gets kind of saturated into the public enough that people are more and more aware. Because I really do think there's sort of that crucial tipping point that if you take a few bike rides to a few locations and you figure out what the route is, how long it's going to take you, all of a sudden it's much easier to make it a part of your life than if you sort of contemplate it in the abstract.
And if I can just talk to Bike Provo just for a second. When I first started at MAG, gosh, I'm coming up on 21 years at MAG. when I first started there, was about the time that Bike Provo started. So it's been around for at least 20 years in different iterations, but it's been a constant grassroots effort for that length of time. And it is the organization that is envied countywide because there really are no other, as hard as we've tried over the years and as hard as some other people have tried over the years to build those grassroots organizations in other communities, Bike Provo is the one that everyone looks to. And if I could clone them everywhere else, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Amen. Ms. Ellsworth, go ahead.
Thanks for that. I really appreciate Bike Walk Provo too. My questions about active transportation are how do we facilitate active transportation across major barriers like railroad tracks? That's a big issue in my part of town where there's not great east-west connectivity. I'm in South Provo. And so if folks want to get somewhere, they might have to cross South State Street, or they have to get on State Street, or they have to cross, well, they can't cross railroad tracks. So it just creates some significant physical barriers that make people have to go up and around or down and around. What solutions exist?
There are a number of solutions that, as I brought up on that, the bridge across from 6th South to the Intermodal Center. That's one of those things that we've had in the plan for a long time, and Provo had in their active transportation plan from 2013 that has been updated and I believe has been integrated now into the general transportation plan. As you see things like that are missing, make sure they get put into that general transportation plan and that they get an advocate, that the partners like MAG and UDOT and UTA are aware of those. Because the funding that came for that bridge for the Intermodal Center came through a U.S. government grant, through MAG and through UDOT, and now partially through Provo City. And that's about a $5.5 million bridge. Those are not cheap by any means. But through the planning and long-term effort, we were able to find those funds and get those into place. And we're hoping that by 2022, that will be complete. Currently, as far as we know, it's fully funded.
So you're saying there's a chance for South Provo?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
there's always a chance.
Jim, could I add in, look at what Lehigh did with the Lehigh Technology Corridor Project funded by I-15 or UDOT. They built 2 shared use paths on either side of I-15. They moved the entire interstate 10 feet to the east to accommodate that. And that was at the request of Lehigh City and the local governments, Utah County in that area, to try to mitigate the impacts of these major transportation facilities. These facilities become barriers to our communities, is what I believe you're alluding to, council member. And we need to mitigate that impact by minimizing and then avoiding and then mitigating when we cannot do those other 2 things. And UDOT recognizes that, and UTA as well. So speak up and hold us accountable in the design of those projects.
Mr. Fillmore.
You referenced earlier the possibility of a bridge across Utah Lake. I know that people have been dreaming and scheming and hoping and studying what could be done to rejuvenate that lake and make it more viable for both recreation and the county's overall utility. What is the status right now with MAG and the surrounding governmental entities with respect to future planning or exploring possibilities?
Great question. There's a Utah Lake Commission that's currently active. Every city in Utah County sits on the Utah Lake Commission. They have a small capital program right now to try to improve water quality. And so there's quite a bit of a planning taking place right now on Utah Lake. And then you hear about these kind of proposals. UtahCrossing.com is one proposal by a private equity group to put together enough money to actually build a bridge structure across the lake. And so, but that's been around as long as I've been working at MAG as well, kind of alluding to Jim's tenure as well.
I know a few years ago, there was a group that was intensely involved in trying to generate a larger organic kind of commercial enterprise. That is dredging the lake, which, as you know, would generate a lot of positive benefits, and using that dredge material to build a toll road, perhaps, and little island marinas in the lake and whatever. They seem to have disappeared. Probably just a cost matter, but I mean, I'm aware of the Lake Commission, but I'm just wondering, I mean, is there any traction for any major effort to dredge and develop the lake?
The Utah Division of State Lands, Fire, and Forestry actually own the bed of Utah Lake, and anyone that wants to conduct any type of environmental work must first get a permit through the state of Utah, and right now there are no open permits studying any proposals. There was an open permit about 5 years ago or so with the bridge structure, but that has since lapsed, and so they've closed that permit as well.
So pretty much dead, other than dreaming possibly about a bridge, huh?
That's right.
Okay. Well, if Utah prospers the way you're all predicting, maybe the state can write the big check, right? Okay.
Maybe we need a committee to preserve the lake bed like we have a committee to preserve the foothills.
There you go. I just suspect that it's going to take a lot of money to do anything major there. Maybe it'll be a combination of federal, state, and private money, but I don't think the economy is ripe for that right now.
It does seem too, as I recall, that there's issues with the sediment of the lake, right? In terms of
yeah, very much so. Yeah, if you could double the depth of the lake, take it down to 20 feet even, it has huge benefits in terms of vegetation, marine life, turbidity, and just the overall quality of the water. But to dredge the lake, it's a pretty big body of water. And the question is, what do you do with that silt? And even then, you've got problems. I'll bet Steve or Sean would confirm this. You're still going to have to put pylons way down into the sediment. It's just a tough lake bed to deal with. But it would sure be nice if we could turn that lake into a thing of beauty. Well, enough on that. Thank you.
any other questions for our presenters, Mr. Price in particular? Thank you, Mr. Price. We appreciate this presentation, and we appreciate your confirmation of our suspicion that we have a good thing going with citizens in Bike Walk Provo. So it's good to have that corroborated from a professional in the field. But I find that this issue of active transportation is a really promising one. So we appreciate that.
Thank you very much for the time.
Yeah. Okay, we have reached the end of our presentations, and now we have time for discussion to wrap up the retreat. And I don't know if there are any specific concerns that counselors have that you want to raise at this time. One issue might be, where do we go from here? Is there a next step when it comes to thinking about transportation? And maybe at some point it would be helpful from staff. I don't know if Gary's still available, just to maybe give us a sense of, in terms of the general plan process as it starts to unfold, what would be some of our next steps. Ms. Ellsworth, go ahead. And then Cliff.
Yeah, my concern after this really worthwhile retreat is that we now understand more about South State Street and how important it is to regional connectivity. We know that land use and transportation are interconnected, and where this is a federal highway and we can't expect a change in designation, and we can only expect an increase in vehicle trips. I think we need to reconsider the associated land uses, and I don't think that residential is the highest and best use on a federal highway where it's 50 or 60 miles per hour. I think that's something that we probably need to reevaluate as soon as possible.
Thank you. Cliff, go ahead.
Yeah. So we've had a good opportunity here from our regional partners, our state partners. As I go through my notes, the question that stands out still for me, and I think Shannon touches on it, and you all have commented on it, those of you that have commented, the first question that Becky Zimmerman asked us is, what is it we wish to become? And, where do we see Provo, and as a broader context, and then how does transportation fit into that? We've heard from UDOT, UTA, and MAG, and I think those are very helpful. I know that we've had correspondence asking from groups like the bike groups to come and talk to us, and I think if we have another retreat, and I'm starting to think we ought to just call them workshops, but if we have another retreat or workshop on this, then I think we should invite some of these community groups and get their input. One person we haven't heard from tonight, partly because we only had limited time and we wanted to focus on kind of the higher end things, but we probably should hear from Dave Decker and his team on kind of on the ground issues with transportation planning, how it affects what he's accomplishing and what they need to do. So part of my question for you is, ideally, if we do this a part 2 to this, who do you want to hear from? Are there groups you want to hear from? How does that fit in? Recognize that we want to stay very, very high level in terms of identifying what we want the city to be, but also recognize that the council is, as the elected body, is only one portion of that, and design workshop and Gary McGinn and his team, they're going to go out into the community as well and get more public input as we should. So I just wanted to kind of get a sense from you as council members, who do you want to see? What type of groups do you want to hear from? Should we do a part 2? And ultimately, should we do a part 2?
Well, maybe I'll chime in a thought as you were talking. I've had many conversations on and off with Bike Walk Provo and would welcome. I don't know that we've had a formal presentation from them. So maybe that would be a good thing to do. I think there's a lot to learn from that conversation and sort of understand. I guess the only trick is that if it's part of our high level conversation, it might get so down into the specifics that that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just doesn't necessarily move this conversation about the planning forward. And well, I think it does. Sorry, I don't mean to say that. I guess maybe we can ask for a presentation that sort of helps us to envision higher level principles and planning regarding active transportation. One thing that I kind of wish, and this could be also something that's in conversation with Dave Decker and the chairs and with the administration, but it seems to me like, you know, a lot of the changes that we want not only depend upon good planning, but really sort of shifts in attitudes, right, and shifts in awareness. And I think public awareness about the value of and importance of reducing our dependence on the car, and, you know, thinking about air quality and encouraging active transportation and mass transit, and maybe even trail use. You know, it's been, this was mentioned several times today, that as a result of the pandemic, we saw this explosion of I think that's, and I don't know who it was that said it, but the percentage rise in trail use was sort of what we would expect to see, you know, 20 or however many years out in front of us. And that, I think that's probably also a conversation worth having, especially since the Parks and Rec is undergoing their own master planning. I don't know if that ends up being something that needs to come before the council or not. I'm just kind of brainstorming here, but like good opportunities for us to really champion a vision for how we want to go forward. Ms. Ellsworth, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate that Cliff is keeping us high level on this. I just want to share an experience I had last year when I went to the open house for the terminal for the Provo airport, and the architect had images of all these different kinds of buildings, right? Some were really modern and some were traditional. And he said, you know, which ones do you like? And I was like, well, I like this one, but it doesn't look like Provo. And I like this one, but it doesn't look like Provo. And he said, well, does it look like Provo in the year 2050? And that really got me thinking, what does Provo look like in the year 2050? Because the airport terminal may not look like Provo in 2010 or 2015, something that we're familiar with, but what does Provo look like in the year 2050? And who's going to be using these systems and this built environment in the year 2050? And I think that's kind of obvious, but also easily forgotten. And that's why I hope throughout this process, when we talk about transportation and housing and land use and parks and trails, that we consider who's using these systems in the year 2040 or 2050. Because I think the people who will be using them are a lot of them already here, right? They're in middle school, they're at BYU. We just have to find out what their needs are going to be 20 or 30 years from now.
Any other comments, Mr. Harding?
I've appreciated Mr. Black being here with us with our Transportation Mobility Advisory Committee. Perhaps if we do have a second workshop, perhaps we could invite them and have them discuss some of the more near-term as well as the long-term items that they've been discussing. Just bring the council up to speed on some of those.
I think that's probably appropriate. So what I'll start working on is another retreat and work with leadership to consider who to bring back. Wonder, is Dave Decker still in the room? And does he have anything he would like to add at this point?
I don't see Dave Decker on here, but we do have Shane Winters and David Day with us from Public Works, so they may be able to offer some insight.
Oh, you can check with Mr. Decker, I suppose. Mr. Fillmore?
George, I was, with respect to the question you posed, where do we go from here? I'll just state the obvious. We need input from a lot of groups, you know, not just Black Walk Provo and that kind of thing. We've got to, really would like to talk to virtually every director in the city. If Mayor Bafusi could coordinate that with us, would love to hear what they have to say in terms of their concerns, their worries, their hopes, their ideas. And so we can mesh all that together at some point in time. We have just, you know, every department in the city has got a voice, and things we probably ought to hear, right?
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Black?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a few general thoughts, and thank you all for letting me join in this. It has been really, really great to be here. When working on the Transportation Master Plan, one of the struggles we had from TMAC's perspective was the plan is based on these really robust traffic modeling models, traffic transportation planning models that measure traffic really well. And it's generally true that whatever you can measure is what you will focus on or what you will accomplish. We're really good at measuring traffic, counting cars, measuring delay, all of that. But the industry in general, the world in general, still isn't great at measuring quality of life or measuring community impact. And so, to use 820 North as an example, when the community has a lot of concerns, but there's this big red line on a map saying there's delay problems, it's really hard to say, how do we measure something to compare to this traffic measurement that says we have a problem? And there's not an easy answer to that, but from my perspective, I think the general plan has to have some really well thought out and robust qualitative measures to balance these really, really good quantitative measures that we have for measuring traffic only. I hope that makes sense, but I think that's one of the big challenges we face here. We have to have qualitative measures to balance the really good quantitative measures for other aspects of transportation.
Yeah, I agree. I think otherwise it ends up being like everybody's favorite assumption versus everyone else's favorite assumption, right? So right. If I assume that it's a zero-sum game, and if the city starts tilting toward active transportation, that's anti-car or something like that, and we don't actually have any real measures of what kind of an impact it would have on the city financially and in terms of users to build more bike lanes, then I think we're just inviting infighting that is right. Not active because people are just going to be talking past each other. I think that's really important. I don't know how to do that exactly. So if you have ideas, Mr. Strachan.
Gary McGinn and I, when we were planning this event, Gary and I had a discussion about the trade-offs that we have to make. Gary can probably summarize it better than I can, but essentially it comes down to every roadway that we build has an impact on a community. Every neighborhood has an impact on the roadways, and how do we? One of the questions I think we have to, I don't know if we solve it, but we should probably discuss it at some point, is the balance between being a community of commuters, both incoming and outgoing, and the neighborhood and the sense of community we have as a place to be and a place to live and those kinds of things. And so often when we're talking about transportation, we're focused on the commuter and how does that balance out? And what our residents will probably come at us with and share with us is their desire to be a community of neighborhoods. And your challenge when you talk about, we had this discussion about 820 North last year, the balancing of those competing needs. And that's something as a council and as the group doing the general plan, as a community, we're going to have to try and figure that out and what it looks like in 30 years.
I think one of the things that we've been hoping for through our general plan process is not that the general plan will give us the answers necessarily for individual projects and decisions, but it'll give us a methodology by which we go through and analyze projects so that we can make those value judgments and make that balance. Because as a community, we could decide to be nothing but commuter, for lack of a better term, commuter oriented in our transportation system. And that would have one set of results for us. Or we could make it completely the opposite, and that would have one set of results for the actual types of projects that come in. And how do we go about balancing those? And what are the factors that we look at to, as Clancy was talking about, measuring quality of life? That was a really difficult thing that TMAC struggled with. We can talk about intersections and level of service and failure and volumes of traffic, but how do we quantify how people feel about their neighborhood and whether they want to live in that neighborhood that's impacted by a street? And so as we go through a process, hopefully we'll have some sort of metric or something in this general plan that will guide us in our decisions, and in the general plan, a rough value statement from the council of how you want us to go about as city staff balancing those competing interests. We don't want to shut down our economy, but at the same time, we want a neighborhood that might be impacted by a busy street to be livable and safe. And as they pointed out earlier, UDOT moved a highway 10 feet one direction to accommodate trails. That wouldn't have happened without a robust discussion in the community that that's something that they valued, because that was a big undertaking to move an entire freeway over to accommodate a path.
Mr. Harding.
As we're talking about some of these high-level priorities and values, I think it's very important. I think that is the important discussion. That's what we should be aiming for with the general plan. And I hope it's clear that I'm an advocate for smart growth, for sustainable growth, for high quality of life. I just want to make sure that we understand a lot of this is trade-offs and balances. I sometimes joke that we all want people to drive the speed limit in front of our house, but we will want to drive fast in front of everyone else's house. Everyone wants their own neighborhood to not have anyone drive through their neighborhood, but we all want to we all value connectivity when we're trying to get from where we are to where we're going. And so I do think we need to be careful that we think broadly about who we want to be. It's not just a question of, do we want to be a community of commuters, or do we want to be a community with vibrant neighborhoods. If we want to continue to have the role as the county seat and the center of finance and commerce, and if we want to be the center of education, if we want to play that role, then with that comes the responsibility of having that mobility for others. And so I think a lot of that, instead of looking at it as just like a single spectrum, and where do we want to be on this single spectrum, a lot of it I think is thinking creatively and approaching things creatively, where if we can reduce the distance of our daily destinations, then we can still have the same amount of mobility, and access to where we need to get without nearly as many vehicle miles traveled. And so it doesn't have to be we're anti-car if we're pro some of these other things, if we can build a better community. And so I hope we stay at a fairly high level and just appreciate these trade-offs and look for look for new ways to approach some of these difficulties that we've had in the past.
Thanks for that. I think just two thoughts in response to what you were saying. I don't think it was brought up in today's presentations, but I know this has been pointed out to me a number of times in conversations I've had with Envision Utah and people like that, I mean, even though there was a discussion in that video about how much our demographics are going to change in Utah, which I'm sure remains true, I recall that in Utah Valley, a higher percentage of the growth will be coming from our own population reproducing itself right here. So I do think there's something to be said for helping the public and all of us keeping in mind that what we're working for and working toward isn't growth for growth's sake. It's not about just sort of capitalizing on all the exciting economic opportunities and then running roughshod over the personality of Provo and ruining neighborhoods in the process, ruining that sense of connection. I think it's a struggle, and I think you're right. There's so much balancing that goes on, but it's a struggle to actually maintain some of the things that we love about Provo, precisely because they're not going to be available. Because otherwise, those things are not going to be available to future generations. And I do think, I don't know, I'm just thinking about this, neighborhood discussion in Provo is such a strong thing. And I think there's a strong sense of connection to your community that starts very immediately on the streets that you live, where you live, and the neighbors you know. And just as a general principle, or maybe a plug again for active transportation, to my mind, nothing makes me feel more isolated from my community than when I'm stuck in a traffic jam and I'm just sitting in a car, right? And I'm not talking to anybody, I don't see anybody. But that really changes when there's a flow of people seeing each other and talking to each other and interacting with each other, which I think happens much more likely. It's much more likely on sidewalks and bike paths and even on mass transit rather than in individual automobiles. Anyway, that's just a little. I think because I think sometimes we sort of, I guess what I'm wanting to argue against, in case there's this anxiety that progress and growth doesn't necessarily mean, a kind of urbanization in which neighborliness and sense of community gets lost. I think you can work towards that mutual goal. Well, we're almost at the witching hour here. I don't know if there's other comments that anyone wants to make, or if we have at least at this point enough information for staff to help us and leadership to go back to the drawing board and figure out next steps for us.
No new comments or questions, George. Just thank you for securing the various videos and presentations we got today. I think it'd be nice to have those each in our file. Some very good information there. So will you be circulating that?
Cliff?
They normally end up going into our agenda, agendas.provo.org, and you can get them from there. We can let you know when they're all available. We should probably collect them and send them to the council members. Also, on behalf of the council and the staff, I really want to thank all the presenters that came out and participated with us. We gave them some broad categories, and I think they hit things very well on the head and gave us a lot to think about. So for the folks from MAG and UDOT and UTA, thank you so much for coming out and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us.
Ms. Ellsworth, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that that when we have future conversations and future policy conversations and make decisions, that we are pretty meticulous and apply lessons learned to the west side of Provo, because that's one place that we hopefully haven't we haven't made mistakes yet. We also haven't made successes yet because it's somewhat undeveloped. So let's make sure we do it right.
All right. Well, if there are no other comments, then I will say the magic words that if there is no objection, we will now adjourn by unanimous consent. I see no objection. So it's been a pleasure to be with you all. And again, thank you to all those who presented. And we'll look forward. We will be having our next council meeting on November 10th, if I remember correctly. So thank you all. Have a great evening.